Welcome, everybody, to a very special first ever Sunday live stream, a joint episode with History of Westeros and the Mythical Astronomy of Ice and Fire podcast. This is a really cool thing that we're doing. We haven't done anything like this before, so it's going to be a lot of fun, I think. And it's also a good way to pass the time in between tonight's episode of actual Game of Thrones, episode 5 coming up tonight, so that's really fun. Before the show passed the books, meaning...
Hey, mine says off air, man. And my YouTube doesn't show anything.
Off air? What do you mean?
The Google Hangouts says off air.
The Google Hangout is off air.
You're supposed to be on YouTube, yeah. Anyway.
It's on YouTube, yeah. I
So,
see it live.
now that the show has passed the books, it's different. Like before the show passed the books, we used the books to guess with a reasonable level of success what was coming in the show. And now that the show has passed the books, the script is flipped. No books have come out since the show, so we can't say we've had reasonable success, though I suspect we've gotten a lot of things right. Time and the winds of winter will tell. But the fact is that George R. R. Martin told the showrunners a lot. A lot. He didn't feed them a ton of specific details about how and why things got to be the way they are, but he told them about what major things would happen. You got to say that again. Not why and when necessarily the major things happen, but he told them what those major things were. And one of the biggest reveals of these past book seasons is that the children created the White Walkers. This is almost certainly not just show-only canon, though like I said, some of those details probably are. Bran sees the birth of the White Walkers, for example, and he hears from Leaf, "We were at war. We were being slaughtered. Our sacred trees cut down. We needed to defend ourselves." And later Bran sees the same birthplace covered in snow in that same episode, just before the Night King comes to his cave and kills the Three-Eyed Raven, making Bran the new Three-Eyed Raven. I believe the high points of that scene are book canon. I believe the children created the others. And here's this A Storm of Swords chapter, number 5. It became one of those retroactive clues. One of those, oh wow, this was here all along, and the show pointed it out for us. Here's the quote.
All right. So it says, this is Cotter Pike talking to Sam Tarley. He says, "Sam the Slayer," he said, by way of greeting. "Are you sure you stabbed an other and not some child's snow knight? This isn't starting well. It was the Dragonglass that killed it, my lord," Sam explained feebly.
And in that quote, there's a lot just there. It's like, wow, a child's snow knight. That's exactly what an other is. It's an armored, and armed, man-sized creation of snow and ice, right? It's just a very good metaphor that no one really caught because the reveal of the children creating the others hadn't been there yet. So I also believe in the books, just like the show tells us, that the children created the walkers because of their wars with the First Men, just like Leaf says. I also believe the children created the White Walkers from First Men, which is displayed on the show. I also think it's likely that the children, or some of them, realized they had gone too far by creating the others and joined with men to defeat them. And all of that is in that scene that is in the cave. Jon mentions basically all these things. Did they create them using Dragonglass to the heart? Now that I'm not so sure about. That's a detail. I don't know that George told them that. And I don't know that he told them there's a literal boss other, like HBO's Night King in the books. But of the things I did just say I do believe happens in the books, a lot of that did come from the show. And we'll be able to look back eventually when the Winds of Winter's out and see how much of this is right or not. But
Will you please move the microphone cord? It keeps doing that thing.
Yeah. Sorry, folks. A little technical display here. A little technical issues.
I think your knee might be sometimes touching it.
I don't think it is. It's pretty far from my knee. Yeah, I'm hitting the other cord. Anyway. And another thing about the show and the books is that the show can't do internal stories very well. It's hard to convey a thought, even with, the amazing actors on Game of Thrones doing all their facial expressions and things like that. But likewise, the books can't do complex visuals. Sometimes even simple images can be a bit of a challenge to describe. So what the show does then, as a whole, in general, is it takes written concepts that George gave them and turns them into visuals as much as possible. The simplest is with characters. Again, for example, like instead of a look of shock flashed across his face, we actually get to see someone like Nikolai Coster-Waldau's face doing exactly that. So the show, simply put, takes words on a page, turns them into images on the screen. So when I consider these carvings in the cave amidst all that Dragonglass on Dragonstone, I wonder what words of George R. R. Martin they used to generate these ideas. Some of it was probably their own invention, but it's too central and too important for them to have made it all up. Too much of it rings true from what we already know in the books. Too much of what we see with these etchings lines up with our existing book canon beliefs. So within these symbols are some major clues. Eventually the books will reveal, probably through Bran's point of view, just like it is in the show, the birth of the others, maybe parts of the pact, maybe more details about that, how the others were defeated the first time around, why the long night came, why it occurred in the first place, how it ended. And I can't wait to read about all those deeper truths. But I believe we got a major visual preview in these Caverns of Dragonglass, and that's what we're here to tell you all about. And of course, our friend here, LmL, co-host for today, is leading the charge with that. So, hey David, hey LmL, tell everybody all about you and where to find you and all that, and what we're all about here today.
Well, hey everybody. It's nice to be here with you on Sunday. And I really just have one thing to give you, which is my website, lucifermeanslightbringer.com. It's got my YouTube and my Patreon and my podcast. All of that's linked from one place. And at the end of this episode, you're going to have a pretty good idea about what kind of stuff is running through my head. So I'll just leave it at that. If I may comment on a couple of things that you just said, I just want to pipe in and say that I mostly agree that probably the children created the White Walkers. I would add a little asterisk, which says that I think it might be more complicated than that. I think it's definitely true that green seer magic was involved in creating the walkers, and I think the children were a part of it, but I'm not sure it was as simple as they simply created them as a weapon against the first men. I think that's a good hypothesis, but I just want to say that it's not quite canon in my mind yet.
Yeah, it's certainly a strong theory and nothing certain. So yeah, it makes all... We're working with incomplete stuff here, yeah. Incomplete, but awesome.
And then the other one is we read that quote about the child Snow Knight, but there's also a quote in Asha Greyjoy's Wayward Bride chapter where she's basically being hunted by the Northmen who've dressed up like trees. And when she starts to notice the trees and bushes are creeping closer, she says she remembered a time, that story of the time when the children of the forest turned the trees to warriors. And
that's a good one.
If there's some sort of part of the weirwood spirit or presence that like animates the others, then they would be somehow turning the tree spirit into a warrior. And I think that's actually closer to what happened. Like in the TV show, it's just a dude and he's stabbed in front of the weirwood tree and he turns into the White Walker. It's maybe implied, but not really spelled out if there's any of the like weirwood essence that's going into that. But in the book reality, that's kind of my theory, is that it's actually like a slice of the weirwood net presence, or maybe somebody that's been trapped inside the trees, or the spirit of the trees themselves that's like animating the ice demons. And so I just want to throw that out.
Yeah, there's a lot of good stuff here. Of course, we have Ashea running production today. She's doing even more work than usual because this is by far the most images we've ever had in a podcast episode. So please make sure to give her plenty of thanks because she's working hard, even more than usual. And for that reason, this is not going to be a podcast episode. It's too visual. That's part of one of the many different things we're doing today. There's too many images for this to be an audio-only episode, so it's going to be podcast only. Hopefully that's okay with most of you guys. Of course, if you're here in the live stream, you're already here watching, so that probably doesn't matter too much to you. But that's just the way it is. We're also not going to do too many announcements and no Patreon credits because this is a joint episode, and David wrote a lot of it. He's got his own Patreon. We're not going to mix all that up, mostly because we have time constraints too. David, you're appearing on another show today.
Woo!
Yeah. So
that's right, my peoples. It's the Don, Tony Teflon. You know what time it is. Chia!
That's right. That's the show that he'll be on later. Tony's lead up to tonight's episode. So David's going to be live streaming all day long. So that's that. This is mostly a scripted episode, despite the fact that we've been kind of chatty so far, and that's generally like our book topics tend to be. But we will allow questions if you have super chats or just regular questions. Ashay is monitoring that, although, like I said, she has a lot to do with all the images and everything, so some of them may sneak by. We'll do our best to catch them. And I see already about 450 people here watching live. That's great. People are filing in.
Thanks to Ion Trone for helping build the hype on Twitter.
Yeah, thanks, Ion Trone. So, a bit more about the format before we get started. We have several scripted parts here. We have some open discussion abilities. We're gonna maybe take some questions at the end, time permitting. Of course, we're gonna talk about the birthplace of the others. We're gonna talk about some deep theories with regards to the books and what all this means. And, we're going to talk a little bit about how the children, maybe change their mind a little bit along the way. And as Jon Snow points out, the first men and the children work together to fight the others. And, just for example, just as a start off, a couple of basic things that some people wanted to make sure that we cleared up and have explained. Like, why is it called Dragonglass in the first place? That's actually a good question. Some people probably think it's a basic question, but it's not. It's important, and it's important to get straight before we dive too far into this.
Yeah, it's actually, I think, a really good example of how George Martin likes to create magic. He always talks about he doesn't like magic systems, quote unquote, and I think he gave us a brand new version of that quote at the con just this weekend. Essentially, he doesn't like it to be too organized. He wants it to be mysterious and all that. However, he does have tendencies. And what he tends to do is to use the natural elements as sort of a conduit or a source of magic. We see water magic and fire magic, and the others are basically like a winter storm personified. The Doom was like a magical volcanic explosion.
I'd say that's particularly true with the children, because their closest with nature is just, ubiquitous, right?
Exactly. And so Dragonglass, it's obsidian is what they're talking about. And obsidian is formed in volcanic areas. It's essentially magma that cools under certain conditions having to do with oxygen and speed, a cooling rate and stuff. You can look it up on Wikipedia if you want to know. But essentially, it's cooled magma. And so George, in his world, because there's magic in his world, he has infused obsidian with the qualities of fire magic. And so it works to kill the others, which are ice demons. And so
Frozen Fire is one of the other names for it, and that's a really perfect name for it.
Exactly.
And also, George has specifically stated that obsidian in Westeros, Planetos, Taros, whatever your preferred name, isn't the same as Earth obsidian. It does have some small differences that are mostly chalked up to magic. Kind of like how humans in George R. R. Martin's world have small differences with relation to how genetics work and things like that. And how his dragons have 2 legs instead of 4, things like that. It's all just small differences. And
we've got a super chat.
Oh, we do.
We got a super chat, and it's on point, so we can read it right now.
Cool.
It's from
Princess Scanius.
Princess Scanius, have we seen everything that defeats the others, i.e. Dragonglass, Dragonfire, Valyrian Steel, maybe Dawn, or will we see more? I would tend to think that is probably it. We haven't seen Dragonfire or Dawn do it. I suspect Dragonfire certainly can. We haven't actually seen Valyrian Steel kill White Walkers in the books either, but I think that it probably can.
Yeah, maybe not as cleanly as it does in the show, but I imagine it's effective.
Can Meteors kill White Walkers?
Oh, well, if the fire is hot enough, I imagine that would be problematic for them.
There you go.
And I don't know that regular fire is problematic to the others, though it is problematic to the undead. Because we even see in that scene where the Night King and his cronies are heading to the cave, Leaf and her buddies throw their fire past the others at the Walking Dead, because I don't think that was just a cheesy movie scene where they're just neglecting to hit the main target. I think they know that the others wouldn't be affected. And sure enough, the others walk right through that fire. So that does make sense, but it does stop the Walking Dead. I keep saying Walking Dead as if it's the TV show, but you know what I mean, the whites. But yeah, so I believe we'll probably see a few more things, but we've probably seen the main things. I mean, obsidian seems to be like the main tool. And obviously we hear the term dragon steel from ancient past, and that might be similar or exactly the same as Valyrian steel. Probably not exactly the same, but it's probably similar, and we'll probably learn more about that as well. Hopefully Sam digs some of that up in the books in the Citadel soon, either in book or show.
The secret weapon is a tonic boiled down from the kidney of a squisher. It's actually mortal to the others.
You heard it here first, folks. The squishers are going to rise from the depths to help humanity fight the others.
That's the master plan, to bring them into the story seamlessly. the hot pie boiling down the innards of squishers. Okay, let's get back on topic.
Okay, so we're going to start with the actual symbols. Go ahead and take us away on this, David.
Okay, so we've got 4 symbols in particular, and Ashea is going to whip some images at us here. The first one is going to be the vortex, which is usually made up of several spiral arms, and there are several of them in the cave paintings.
Yes.
Do you have that image?
Yes, Ashea is bringing that up in a second here, the vortex one.
And so there's just a quick word. There's a spiral and then there's a vortex. And when I say those 2 words, what I'm talking about is a spiral is one arm of spiral, and a vortex is essentially several spiral arms. So when we use those 2 words, that's what we'll be referring to. And so now you can see some different vortexes. The one on the lower right's got kind of a combination of a sun and several symbols, but in general, you see the multiple spiral arm vortex.
Before we move on to the next one, we've got 2 more super chats. So let's take care of those real quick. The first one is from Gildor Inglorian 17 from Canada. Thanks there. Do you think that the White Walkers are a bit too easy to kill? One touch of Valyrian steel or obsidian and they disintegrate. Yeah, in the show, I think that's just a way for them to make it really clear how deadly that stuff is. I doubt it'll be quite that easy in the books, although to be fair, when Sam stabbed that obsidian dagger in the other's back, it just basically just melted. We haven't seen that same effect on Valyrian steel, but you know, I don't know that it's too easy, because I think maybe that's the children may have had that intent in the first place to say, hey, maybe they built this weapon as with a failsafe, you know, like, well, we made them, but we want to make sure that it doesn't get too out of control. But maybe it got too out of control anyway. I'm not sure. What do you think, David?
Yeah, I tend to agree with that line of thought. Somebody pointed out to me one time that actually the others are pretty easy to kill if you have enough obsidian on hand, and that if under the idea that the children made the White Walkers as a weapon, it makes sense that they would hoard obsidian and then have like the kill switch to the weapon. Somebody proposed that it was actually, they didn't expect the others to raise the dead. And that is the thing that's how they got out of control, essentially, is when they started raising thousands of dead people. Then they were like, oh shit, we don't have a way to deal with that. I mean, you can burn them, but if there's thousands of them, that gets pretty problematic. And in the cold north, it's hard to keep fires going. So,
that makes a lot of sense to me, because yeah, it's like, why would the children want armies of the dead walking around? It doesn't seem like it's the best weapon to create. It seems like the others are indestructible to human weapons enough, especially at that time. I mean, think about how long ago this was. If the children hadn't taught the first men about Dragonglass, the first men have no idea. They don't know about Valyrian steel that far back. There was no Valyrian steel that far back, most likely. And if there was an equivalent, it certainly wasn't widely distributed across Westeros, which was, you know, proto Bronze Age, basically. So they had the others would have been unstoppable without the army of the dead thrown in the mix. I mean, to the first men way back then.
And of course, quick shout out to our Great Empire of the Dawn episode. If anybody who hasn't watched that, that is essentially the way that we can get some sort of predecessor to Valyrian steel present in Westeros, whether that's the dragon steel or Lightbringer, or, you know, multiple Valyrian steel swords. So everybody check that out. That's on History of Westeros' YouTube channel and my YouTube channel.
That's right, as well as up in podcast form. Another super chat here is from Pegleg Pete 1. Thanks, Pegleg Pete. Where does salt fit in with killing the others? It seemed obvious to me that was why they never entered the water at Hardhome.
Oh,
interesting.
That's an interesting idea. The walls, when it melts on Bran, it's salty as a tear, which creates the possibility that maybe the wall is like frozen seawater somehow. Don't ask me how that works, you know? So maybe that's why it stops the others, because it's salty.
It may also be that, you know, the water temperature, I don't know, maybe it's not as cold as the air, you know, I don't know. There might be something related to that as well. But it does seem that they were maybe a little bit flummoxed by the water, and maybe that feeds into some of the whole idea of them, you know, freezing the water to walk around.
Yeah, I'm super not a fan of that, but
yeah, me neither. But it hopefully Hopefully they can't freeze salt water, and that takes care of that.
And then we've also got a super chat related to Sansa and Elizabeth I. Should we take that maybe later on, or it's a little?
We can take it right now. We can give a quick answer. That's a good one. Thanks you, Anna. A little off topic, but yeah, we'll take it real quick.
I don't know anything about that. So
Queen Sansa, based on her similarities to Elizabeth I. Well, it's tough because Sansa's just now coming into her own. We've just now seen her start to be a ruler, and she's not fully a ruler because she's ruling based on Jon Snow. But Elizabeth didn't ever marry, and she was still kind of used her feminine qualities to strong effect, and that's something that I think Sansa's arc does sort of hearken to, but some of it's just a little too far in the future for us to be sure. But I think that's a good catch that it's heading that way. All right, let us get back on track.
Okay, so our second...
Shea will bring up the sun spiral image here, and y'all can take a cool look at that. Almost 600.
All right?
Yeah. Just a little bit of coughing there. She'll survive. Everybody.
Too many kitty hairballs floating around.
Couldn't run out of the room because we had images coming up, but yeah.
Poor Shea. See how hard she's working. This is just on death's door here and still live streaming.
Yeah, I would like to just publicly thank Ashea. I dumped all these images on her, and I'm asking way more of her than what you guys usually do. So again, mad props to Ashea.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have the sun spiral image up now.
Cool. Yes, we do.
Look at this. Very cool.
So I actually set out to just make a multi-picture of just the spirals, but it turns out almost all the spirals have these, sun rays or little barbs coming out of them. So I just ended up thinking about that as a sun spiral because they're just always combined almost.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's a really cool. Like basically one thing to keep in mind as we're seeing all of these images is to consider how natural they are and how they are. This is something we're going to talk about a lot this episode, but I want to throw that out here first. And to consider how these naturally occurring images or naturally occurring patterns in nature relate to the natural origins of the children and the others themselves, and how this is all one big continuum of concepts.
Yeah, we're gonna get into all these symbols in detail. Fear not. And so the third one, and this is my favorite. This would be the circle within a circle image, or the double circle image.
Shea's gonna pull that one up. It's called double circle quad.
You don't need to say that part. But
okay.
You can just say a Shea.
Cool.
You guys can be talking during that.
Yeah, so we have a bunch of arrows pointing out the specifics here. And you can see in this first image, we've got all these double circles. And these double circles, to me, the most obvious interpretation is an eclipse. But David, you have a lot more to say on this eclipse concept because it appears in so many different ways, across so many different myths, across so many different parts of human history, as well as here in A Song of Ice and Fire.
Yes, we're going to have a lot to say about that.
And finally, Ashea is bringing up the fourth image of the main group of symbols, which is the circle with a line through it. And that is also found in a lot of places.
Yep, and this is the one that some people have been calling a theta or a phi, and it sometimes looks like one or the other, and we're going to talk about that. But we're primarily referring to it as a circle with a line through it, because that is what it is. And
yes.
Essentially, the idea is, it may or may not be referencing phi and theta.
Yeah.
But it is first and foremost a symbol of the children of the forest, which is a circle with a line through it.
Right.
So now,
sorry. No, you go ahead.
I was just going to say, Ashea is going to put up the image of the theta and the phi next to each other so that you can sort of see the difference. Basically, the theta has a horizontal line and the phi has a vertical line, and they both have circles.
Yeah, I think a lot of people have gotten this confused. I've seen some other creators make this mention, and a lot of people are referring it to a theta, which is not correct. The phi and the theta are similar, but as you can see, there's a distinct difference, which is the vertical or horizontal line. And it will be the show may or may not be intentionally referencing the Phi and the Theta, because these are just very basic symbols. It doesn't have to. We don't have to look at what Phi and Theta mean to get at this, but we are going to, just in case it matters. The point is that these are naturalistic symbols that are basic symbols that have occurred in many different cultures in the real world, not just Greek culture, and thus it is a great application here to, you know, a proto-human culture or to a proto-non-human culture in this case.
Right. Now, we first saw this shape in the prologue of the very first episode, the prologue scene, because it's the scene from the prologue of A Game of Thrones. But it's the first episode where Waymar, Royce, Will, and Garrett find the chopped up bodies of the wildlings, and it appears to make what looks like a Phi symbol. And now we've got the Phi symbol on the screen there, and the primary association or meaning that people attribute to Phi is the golden ratio, 1.6 to 1. And the interesting thing about the golden ratio is that it produces one of the other symbols that we listed at the top, which is a spiral. And we've got a picture of some of the spirals, the golden spiral in nature, which you can find in flowers and hurricanes and galaxies and all kinds of things. Conch shells. Y'all are familiar with this.
It's this whole idea of this golden ratio. The golden ratio is what, 1.6 to 1 is the math on that, right?
Exactly.
And that's an association with the letter Phi as well.
And so it produces something called the golden ratio, which makes the spiral, and the spiral is called the golden spiral.
Right. Shay's going to pull up the golden spiral here so you can see that. Oh, she already did. Okay, great.
She already did. Yes, she did.
She's ahead of the game.
So now if we could get that image at the Fist of the First Men from season 3, where the others make a spiral of sort of a vortex spiral with dead bodies. And you'll see that, there you go. It is a vortex spiral. So essentially, they're making two images with dead bodies. The first one, it looks like a Phi, which produces a spiral. And the second time, they actually make a spiral.
Yeah, how cool is that? So this is clearly something that they've been planning for a long time. This isn't something they just dropped on us in Season 7, Episode 4. It's been planned for a while. So this is part of why I think they didn't just make all this up on their own. Some of it, yeah, most likely. But a lot of this I think they got from George because it's just been prevalent for so long and because these ideas are so ubiquitous and so tied in with what we believe we've already discovered about the books, even though some of it lacks complete concrete confirmation. Now, let's be honest, we may never get concrete confirmation on a lot of this. Bran can show us a lot, but that doesn't mean he will show us everything. So you would call this like a vortex, right, David? I think we talked about this ahead of time.
Exactly.
It's because of the several spiral arms. It looks kind of like a galaxy, like a spiral galaxy. Again, it's a very naturally occurring shape. And this is the others, in a sense, like representing their own birth. This is what they were born amongst. They were born amongst these symbols. And so, of course, their existence is tied to them. And it's almost like their own religion, of a sense. This is like they worship these symbols because it's what they came from. And I think that's just a really cool idea.
So here's the interesting thing to me is that we've got the others creating this vortex, and they create what looks to be a Phi, which leads to a spiral. And then in this cave, we see a whole bunch of vortexes and spirals. And as I said, a lot of the spirals are inside of a sun. So what is the connection there? Well, the others obviously hate the sun, and they need the sun to go away in order to come out. So the idea that the others are making this symbol and then we're seeing it over the sun, kind of makes you think, well, this has something to do with the long night, which obviously all of this does.
And in some of these images, you can even see the sun being pushed aside, like there's flame bits around the sun, but they're being pushed away. Like one of the images, you can only see half of the sun. It's like the sun's heat is being blocked or pushed away or ended. And that's obviously, you don't need an interpretation of that. That's like the long night beginning or the cold coming on. It just kind of speaks for itself, but it's really cool.
In general, I think it's a bad thing if your sun is vortexing. So
yeah, you don't want your sun spiraling out of control in any direction, either into itself or coming at you. Or the sun needs to stay right where it is and just be what it is without changing much. That's what's best for everyone.
And then we've got another image of this vortex in the obelisks radiating out from the weirwood tree, and Shea will dig that image up here shortly.
Yes.
And everybody could probably remember this. We saw it twice. We saw it once when it wasn't snowy, when the children made the Night King, and then we saw it later covered in snow. And you can see there's spiral arms coming out from the weirwood tree. And the fact that the weirwood tree's leaves are described as bloody hands or a blaze of flame means that this weirwood canopy could actually symbolize blood and fire, which begins to make it seem a lot more like a sun.
Yeah.
So now we've got this spiral vortex uniting the others, the weirwoods, and the sun. And so again, I say this must have something to do with the long night. And now the mystery is, how do the weirwoods or weirwood magic relate to causing the long night?
And well, just a reminder where this image came from. This was from season 6, episode 5, The Door, famous episode, of course. This is from early in the episode when the Three-Eyed Raven is just showing Bran this stuff, and he's learning about it. And this is just before the revelation of, it was you created them. And later in the episode, when the Night King puts his hand on Bran, Bran is walking around seeing this same spot in the snow, and we'll get to that image a little bit later, but just to set it up, I wanted to mention it.
No, we won't.
Oh, we don't have that one.
No.
Oh, okay. We don't have that one in the snow. Never mind. Well, that one exists. Bran sees it later in the episode. It's the same shot, but covered in snow, and that's right when Bran gets detected by the Night King, and he wakes up screaming, he saw me, he touched you, all that.
Exactly. So then we've got a super chat that is on topic. We always like that. Thanks, Jeff Libman. Theory, circle with line through it, suggests a magical event long ago that split the world or knocked the world off its axis. Could that explain the long seasons? Or maybe why west of Westeros may not lead to Essos? I'm not sure about the very last part, but in general, I would say you're barking up the right tree there, Jeff, that this does have something to do with a magical event that, messed up the sort of order of the galaxy or order of the local universe, if you will. So that's a good theory there.
If I remember correctly, George did say we'd at least get a partial explanation for the seasons. So we hopefully will get an answer on that, and we may not have an open question here at the end. But I think that fits perfectly. It's a good example, too, of how George likes to couch his magic in reality. It's not just pure sorcery, things being conjured out of nowhere, things just happening because someone waved their hands. It all fits together. It's these magical origins have roots within nature, like David said, especially in the case of the children. So it has to tie in, and that would explain a lot. If there was some sort of global catastrophe like the Long Night relating to all this, and having the planet knocked off its axis is a great natural explanation for how this could work.
And just real quick, thank you to William Hackenbracht for the just says thanks, keep up the work.
Yes, thank you, William. By the way, maybe it goes without saying, but of course, we're splitting all Super Chat revenue with David. I would assume you guys know that, but just in case, it bears saying.
Call me LmL. They're not going to know who you're talking about.
Oh, yeah, LmL, that guy. I'm just too familiar. LmL.
The secret's out.
David, yes.
So, real quick, I'll just, I don't want to go into this in any depth because they're sort of big subjects, and I've covering them on my podcast at lucifermeanslightbringer.com. But I do want to just tease the fact that I think Azor Ahai was either a green seer or became a green seer. And of course, Azor Ahai is the guy that's sort of most wrapped up in the Long Night events. I actually think he was something of a villain who had something to do with causing the Long Night. And so when we're talking about these spirals connecting the weirwoods and the sun and the others, I think the connection is that whatever human acts were responsible for bringing on the Long Night were performed by Azor Ahai, who was a green seer.
We have go ahead, sorry.
I also think that Nissa, the evidence is pointing to her being a Children of the Forest or a Children of the Forest hybrid, which is an idea that we kicked around a little bit in our discussions about the Great Empire of the Dawn.
Yeah, and the Crannogmen are a good example of that already maybe existing. The Crannogmen might be where that sort of genetic estuary exists, where the children and humans kind of have some shared blood. We have another super chat from Nose Kills. White Walkers making symbols related to the children of the forest, Spiral, and Dragon's Birth, Drogo's funeral pyre, trying to tell why/what they're really after. Yeah, you know.
Shh. We're gonna talk about that. Just hold that thought.
Yeah, hold that thought. Nose kills. We have Drogo's funeral pyre. We definitely caught that. Drogo's funeral pyre. Someone else seemed to have pointed out in the chat. Drogo's funeral pyre has this same
Duke
theta.
Chronic.
That's right. So good catch, folks. But yeah, we'll be getting to that for sure.
No, you can't sneak nothing past these guys.
That's right. That's right. Looks like we're closing in on 700 people watching live. That is awesome. Thank you all very much. Very exciting to have such a nice turnout. Let us keep going. Where are we at? I lost my place.
We're at LmL part where I talk about my theory a little bit.
All right, then take it away.
In order to go further with what I think about the God's Eye, we kind of need to have a basic understanding of what my theory is. So we're going to give you the 2-minute version, which is condensed down from a half-hour video, which is condensed down from a 2-hour podcast. We'll see how this goes. And so now we're actually going to use a couple of animations by Michael Klarfeld, our good friend. So we have that to look forward to. And anyways, LmL TV #1, I talked about the cause of the long night, and I proposed that it was the result.
Did you guys not tell me to do that? The World of
I don't think we've gotten there yet.
Oh, okay. I'm past.
Oh, I know. She's right. I did skip over it a little bit.
Oh, okay.
Okay, I just was worried. I screwed something up.
Okay, yeah. So let's go ahead and go back, make that point. Let's pull up the image of the God's Eye Lake.
It's there. You don't need to pause after you say it. Thanks.
Sorry.
You'll be on a slight lag. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what it is. So in any case, we see this shape. This matches to me the images in the cave of the circle within a circle, and I'm not the only one to notice that. A lot of people thought of the God's Eye.
Yeah, me too.
Of course, in the show. Now let me ask you this: in the show, I'm really confused. Is that little Weirwood Tree spiral place where they made the Night's King? Is that supposed to be on the God's Eye or in the far north?
In the far north, because that's where Bran sees them just waiting, and then as soon as the Night King touches Bran, it's like later in the same episode that they show up at the cave, which is clearly beyond the wall. So it's very far to the north, but apparently not so far from Bran's cave. Unless that's just the show cheating on logistics again, which is entirely possible.
So in any case, the Isle of Faces and the God's Eye, what do we know about it? We know it's heavily tied to green seers, to weirwood trees, and possibly the Hammer of the Waters event. So that is going to figure right in the mix, essentially.
Yes,
now we're going to go ahead and talk about what I think the God's Eye is, and I'm basically relating it to my theory about the Long Night. So we're going to talk about the myth that Dany hears in Book 1, and also in Season 1, because the TV show did it too, having to do with dragons coming from the moon, which was like an egg. And here is the Klarfeld animation coming up. So here's the myth. It goes like this. Once there were 2 moons in the sky, but one wandered too close to the sun and cracked from the heat. 1,000 dragons poured forth and drank the fire of the sun. That is why dragons breathe flame.
Yeah. And that's one of those things that's repeated in a few places, and it's in the book, it's in the show. Yeah, both places, which strengthens it as a central theme.
Now, as to the meaning of this, obviously the dragons that we know don't come from the moon. That's a little bit silly. But any sort of moon cracking event would have the potential to make moon meteors. And meteors and comets have been stylized as dragons and flying serpents in myth and fable all over the world for thousands of years.
Yeah, it makes sense, right? Just a big fiery thing in the sky with a long tail, right? It just fits.
Exactly. And a long night impact winter scenario can be caused by meteor dragons. So this is the first connection I ever made. It was like, oh, okay, we've got meteor dragons. That's interesting. That might be the cause of the long night. I see a few people asking, just to start to jump in here, just see a few people asking who did that. And this is, again, to remind people, this is Michael Klarfeld of claradox.de. He did our maps also here behind us. And he's super talented and has contributed to a variety of different podcasts and shows around. And is just a great guy. Yep. Shout out to Michael Klarfeld. And once again, you can see the full version of this at lucifermeanslightbringer.com and watch these animations over and over.
Yes.
So now the thing is that we also hear about a moon cracking event in the story of Azor Ahai and Nissa Nissa and the forging of Lightbringer. And I actually thought that we didn't really need to read this, but then you mentioned yesterday that Sean Pink, House Beard, had not heard the Lightbringer forging story.
Yeah, it's from back in what, season 2 or season 3. Sean hasn't read the books. It is in the show, but it's just that little bit told by Salador San, and it's a long time ago. I think season 3 maybe. Yeah. I think he tells it to him after Davos is recovering from Battle of the Blackwater. I think that's when it happened. So it's a long time ago, and it's not exactly has had a lot to tie to it since then. Most of the Azor Ahai, Princess of Promise stuff has started up seasons later, so it's easy to not be able to tie those together from a show point of view. But the connection's there, no doubt.
So you want to go ahead and read the myth then?
Sure. Where is that one here? Oh yeah, is this the once there were 2 moons in the sky?
No, we got past it.
Oh, here we are. Yeah, here we go.
Lightbringer.
This is okay. Yeah, 100 days and 100 nights. He labored on the third blade. As it glowed white hot in the sacred fires, he summoned his wife, Nissa. He said to her, for that was her name. How odd to call her by her name. Bare your breasts, and know that I love you best of all that is in this world. She did this thing. Why? I cannot say. And Azor Ahai thrust the smoking sword through her living heart. It is said that her cry of anguish and ecstasy left a crack across the face of the moon. But her blood and her soul and her strength and her courage all went into the steel. Such is the tale of the forging of Lightbringer, the red sword of heroes. And just like it's a long time ago in the show, this is from A Clash of Kings in the book. So pretty early on, relatively speaking, in the saga. It occurs to me, too, that there's a chance that we should consider that the breaking of the world was a part of how they stopped the Long Night, not necessarily the Long Night being caused by the breaking of the world. I think it's more likely to be the latter, but it's possible that to save things, they had to throw the seasons out of whack and all that stuff.
Well, there's definitely that theme kind of runs through the story, right? I mean, nobody's ever completely evil. Like, even the Mountain has, like, blinding migraines that explain his behavior. So the theme that I'm sort of picking up on is the sort of Prometheus or Luciferian theme of reaching for the fire of the gods, challenging God, storming heaven, stealing from heaven. Kind of runs throughout the books. And it's absolutely possible that the person who did this, which I call Azor Ahai, or the Bloodstone Emperor, he had some, he thought he was doing the right thing, or it was an awful thing that he had to do for some terrible reason. That's definitely possible. So
like say burning Shireen. He thought it was for a good reason, and it wasn't. Yeah.
No, I'm on what you would call hashtag Team Abomination, which means that stabbing your wife with a sword is always the wrong thing to do. But we'll see.
Yeah. It's hard to look at that and be like you've said. You've been saying this for a long time. It's hard to look at someone does that, especially after watching the graphic and seeing it the way it's played out, even as a cartoon. It's like, this guy's a hero? Like, what? All right, that's kind of tough to circle back to that after really looking at it closely. I mean, if you hear he saved everyone, then okay, he's heroic, but this is a myth and we don't know every detail about it. And yeah, the cost of saving things may have been very high, and maybe that's not accurate at all. There's a lot to unpack.
I do think it helps to actually see it. But
yeah.
The main part of my theory is that we've got 2 myths that are talking about the moon cracking, and that increases the likelihood that this is something that actually happened.
Yeah.
And I think that it's probably the same event they're talking about. And the Azor Ahai myth is said to take place at the time of the Long Night. Now, technically, he forges Lightbringer right after the Long Night starts. But to me, I mean, that could be wrong. The point is that it happens in approximately the same time. So this moon cracking event, it's tied to the Long Night somehow.
Yeah, I see from Review Pry in the comments here. As a wife, I hope my husband does not kill me just because he's stressed from working 1,000 days on a sword. Yeah, we hope for that too. We hope your husband doesn't. We hope he doesn't labor 1,000 days on a sword at all. Really.
I strongly recommend not doing this, everyone. It's, you'll end up in jail. No White Walkers will be harmed. It's not worth it. Public service announcement.
Yes, public service. Because you all maybe needed to know that it's evil to stab your wife. We just want to make sure that's clear. And we also had this, if we're backing up, we have this black meteor that fell from the sky story that's relating to the Bloodstone Emperor. And the Bloodstone Emperor has a lot of connections to a lot of the modern story. We have, of course, the Great Empire of the Dawn joint episode that we've already mentioned. That's well worth checking out. Also, Euron himself has a lot of connections to the Bloodstone Emperor. And there's a lot of theories about how Euron might have some things to do with causing the Long Night or speeding it along or just assisting it in some way. And there's, we've talked about that at length in other episodes. So this stuff really all ties together nicely. And it's possible that the same meteor that the black stone meteor that fell around the time of the Long Night or before it or however, it's related to or at the same time of the meteor that Dawn was forged out of. We got a white stone and a black stone falling from the sky. Seems like a theme.
And of course, we tied the origins of House Dane back to the Far East, at least potentially so, with their occasional Valyrian looks and their sort of anachronistic sword forging technology. So yeah, we've got meteors and swords sort of coming at us from 3 different directions, all tied to the Long Night potentially. And so the last part of this theory is about what cracked the moon. I think it was a comet, similar to the red comet that we see in the story. Now the comet is many times paralleled with Lightbringer, and I think the moon getting stabbed with Lightbringer, the comet, is essentially a celestial above parallel to the on-the-ground reality of Nissa Nissa being stabbed with Lightbringer the Flaming Sword. And again, the myth says the moon cracked at the same time that Nissa Nissa was stabbed. So these 2 events are linked, joined at the hip. And Michael Klarfeld actually made a video of the combined event that looks like this.
Yeah, so Shay will pull this one up. Very cool looking.
It's got both the things happening at the same time.
Yep, Michael Klarfeld kicking butt again, as you can see here. Great stuff. Yeah, it covers a lot of the angles here. You got the moon in the background. We can see that same sort of eclipse thing with the eye within the eye, and yeah, lots to unpack there.
So with the on the ground version, what we get out of it is a flaming sword, and in the celestial version, what we get out of it are meteors, which can be described as flaming swords. Right. And the flaming sword Lightbringer is in turn associated with dragons and comets. So you see how this kind of all is really the same symbol, different versions of the same symbol.
Now, Ashea is going to pull up the celestial God's Eye image. Is that right?
Yes. Okay, let's get back to the script here. So as you can see, the moon wandering too close to the sun essentially describes an eclipse. You've noticed that we've seen it a couple times now. It looks like an eclipse. And you may have noticed that right before the moon explodes, the whole thing looks like a fiery eyeball. With the sun as the iris and the eclipsing moon as the pupil, and I do not believe that is an accident.
Now, look at that and tell me that doesn't look like those cave drawings with those circles in a circle. It is very similar, if not the exact same thing.
And yes, I made this. This isn't in the books, but it's basically just creating what the book describes, a moon wandering too close to a sun and then exploding. So,
and you even have the sun flames in some of the cave drawings. You even have the sun flames around the outer circle, just kind of driving home the point that this isn't just a circle within a circle. It's actually an eclipse or something like it.
That's right. We'll get back. Yeah, we'll pull that image up in a second. So the next one we're looking at is the map of the God's Eye. And the God's Eye Lake essentially mirrors this celestial sun and moon alignment, with the lake playing the part of the solar iris and the Isle of Faces playing the role of the lunar pupil.
And how convenient that the God's Eye is basically the center of Westeros, too. Right in the middle. I don't think that's an accident.
So this is essentially what I think the circle within a circle symbol represents. It's the Isle of Faces on the ground, and it's the sun and moon alignment in the sky.
By the way, that was the original map from the books. There's the there's very different versions that show the God's Eye maybe a little differently in fan art, but this is what it's supposed to have. This is the shape it's supposed to have from canon. Sometimes that gets lost in the shuffle, but here we're trying to zoom in on as accurate as we can be.
So if we could get the God's Eye quad image up, we've got some comparisons.
Shay will grab that.
Of the different of the different symbols that I'm saying all relate to each other.
Yeah. Now, one thing that works in your favor here is that the carving of the children of the forest and the first men, you can see two of these double circle symbols over their shoulders, as if it were in the sky, which even more drives home the point that this is an eclipse
So
thing.
hold on with that. Let's look at the one that we got up now. So
Okay, cool. I'm jumping ahead a little.
We've got the Clarfeld eye in the upper left.
Yeah.
We've got the lake in the upper right. And then we've got two of the best double circle images from the cave, and these are the two that appear to have sun rays.
You have to look really close to see the sun rays, but they're there. Really easy to miss, especially in the dark. David lightened a lot. Sorry, LmL lightened a lot of these photos, so you can see the sun corona, which is not that easy to catch if you're just watching the episode in regular time. But they're there, no doubt.
So then the next thing we're going to look at is the... let's see, what were you saying? Oh, yes, the one with the picture of the first men and the children.
Sure, we'll grab that.
From the cave paintings. You can see the double circle symbols are like over their shoulders as if they were meant to be in the sky. And this isn't conclusive because the shapes in this cave are kind of all over the place, and it's hard to tell if one image is meant to be understood to be in proximity to another one. But look at that. It looks like it's floating right over their shoulder.
Yep, right there. So
almost
cool.
like a Death Star or something.
And the spiral on the ground as well is interesting with the theta symbol on the ground, which isn't necessarily a theta, but it matches a theta.
But it also has the double circle with a bar through it.
So that's it's like a double theta, not two thetas, but the line and the circle are both doubled.
Of course, that one's more vertical, so we should call that a phi. But again,
I'm sorry, I meant to say phi. Yeah, that's what I meant to say. I got them mixed up.
But again, the most important thing is it is a circle with a line through it, which may or may not imply phi and theta. So just to be clear, don't hit us with the pedantic, rigmarole, guys. Come on.
I love a couple of people are saying that's no moon to our Death Star reference. Of course.
Of course. Yeah, it's one of the best jokes to make. And a quick shout out to Dune, by the way. Let me just show my shirt here. This is in Dune. There is a second moon, and Paul Atreides takes his nickname Wadib from the shadow on the second moon, and you got the worm there, and so you can see it looks kind of like an eye. So it's just one of those ideas that's running around in fantasy.
Yep. And of course, George R. R. Martin's a big fan of Dune too. It bears mention.
Absolutely, there's a lot of Dune references, and if Quinn from Ideas of Ice and Fire is watching, he's probably jumping out of his seat right now because he references his Dune as much as possible, and rightfully so. There's a lot of stuff about the God Emperor and psychic abilities and Bran's consciousness that seem to be really related. He's been talking about it a lot lately to help explain Bran's fragmented consciousness and all that. So I really thought that was great by Quinn.
Cool. Yeah. All right.
So
moving on.
Now, I would argue that the biggest glyph, which is, and if we could bring up,
your logo, is that the one we need?
Yeah, I think so. I'm talking about the biggest glyph in the cave paintings that looks like a sun, and it's got the 9 spiral arms coming out from it. I think So everybody, that one is on double circle quad, Ashea, if you want to pop that up. But you all probably remember it. So the interesting thing is that it also gives us a double circle because there's kind of an inner snake, if you will, a snake spiral. It's got 12 dots inside of its body. And then there's an outer snake spiral that has the 9 rays radiating from it.
And this is the one in the bottom right, yeah. Look at all those dots. There's 9 points. There's 12 points on the inside and 9 tails, right? Isn't that right? 9 tails.
Yeah, and the numerology is always tricky, but the one thing that 9 leaps to mind is the Weirwood Grove of 9, because that's a Weirwood Grove, and we already saw the spiral superimposed over a Weirwood tree. And the King of Winter has 9 swords on his crown. So maybe that's what it has to do with.
Could be. Yeah, I mean, again, let's not forget that the others most likely in both book and show canon were made from human beings, captured humans that were converted. That's why they look like humans. And by the way, a lot of people wonder why the Night King's drawing in the cave had a beard and why the current Night King doesn't. Well, it's possible that it's just a different guy. Maybe there's a new Night King has emerged. But I think maybe it just might try to be a reminder that they're human beings, that they were human beings, because a beard is a human thing. It's not, most creatures out in nature don't have beards. They have hair and fur or whatever, but specifically beards, yeah.
I don't have anything useful to say about that other than there's a King Edric Snowbeard Stark.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think and plenty of the other walkers walking around in the show have beards as well. I'm not actually sure that that any of the ones in the books have beards. I don't recall that being described, but we've hardly seen the White Walkers in the books, if we're being honest. They've mostly just been talked about. So the great visuals that we'll get and descriptions that we'll get of them are mostly yet to come.
So now if we, Shea will put up the picture of my logos again. We gave her the false start a second ago, but if you look at my logo, you can see that I've drawn several versions of this image over the past 2 years, and it's basically all the same thing. It's the sun and moon eclipse alignment, which looks like an eyeball.
And there's that comment.
And, I've been sort of drawing this like a crazy person, scribbling on the walls for 2 years, because it's as soon as you put it together, you're like, oh wait, the sun in front of the moon, oh, it looks like an eye, and wait, the god's eye, and on and on. So then I even made I modified an epic meteor shower time-lapse photo by the photographer named Kenneth Brynden, and this is the god's eye shower image, Ashea. And this one is my attempt to sort of place the god's eye in context up in the sky with, meteors falling down from it, sort of capture the feeling of doom that one might feel looking up at this terrifying celestial eye, followed by a storm of flaming swords.
Imagine
which would be the meteor.
Imagine being an ancient being and seeing this or something like it and being, what would you have almost no context for this thing that's happening. It's like too big to conceive of.
Indeed. If we see something like this in the sky, you should know that something bad's about to happen.
Yeah, get your meteor shelters ready, folks.
And this is essentially my great hope, is that the show is going to do some version of this, some sort of eclipse alignment. I don't know if we'll get full-blown meteor attack. Maybe it'll just be like a magical eclipse that lasts forever. But I think because of all this imagery that it might be going in that direction.
Yeah. And it also is reminiscent of Euron Crow's Eye's banner a bit, right? We see this, Shea's going to pull up this great image from Yvonne Wallington, which is, he goes by the name Draftergy, and some of you guys I think you've seen this one before. We had it in our Euron episode, if I'm correct.
This is an awesome picture. I love this one.
Very cool. Look at that.
And so you can
awesome.
see that it's very similar to the image that I created. And if you look around at all the various Crow's Eye sigil versions that people have done on the internet, they all kind of have this look. And there you go.
We have a couple of... Go ahead, sorry.
Well, you already mentioned it. Euron seems like a Bloodstone Emperor parallel character, and Bloodstone Emperor is the guy that caused a long night. So
true that.
We got a couple super chats here.
That's what I was going to say, yeah.
So any connection, Fabian Talkenberg asks, any connection between the 12 dots in the spiral and the 12 companions of Azor Ahai? That would be my guess. The 12 companions and or the 12 houses of the Zodiac. But in the book, I think that George is actually tying the Zodiac to the 12 companions. So it's all kind of a piece.
And don't forget, in episode, I think 4 of season 4, don't quote me on that, it's around that general vicinity, we see that walker carrying off Craster's child into the north. And there appear to be 12 walkers there. And that could be related. Indeed. And that even ties into this next question, super chat from Nancy Groth, who says, what about the Night King who was Night's Watch Lord Commander? Maybe he had a beard. And that Night King was the 13th Lord Commander, apparently. So that, the numerology, if there's a connection there, it seems to be this, that the number 12 and with the 13th Lord Commander all seems to fit pretty well. And maybe he had a beard.
It goes straight to the Night's King, and it goes to the last hero and his companions. That's the obvious association for 12. So good call on that.
Yeah.
And thanks for the super chat.
Yes, thanks very much. Now, let's look at going back to Euron's banner. We don't have to pull it back up again, but this is the description when Sam sees it near Old Town. Just think of how, because it's important, again, since we're doing this book-to-show crossover, it's really important not just to see the images, but to see how George describes them, because that's pretty important. How the POV characters interpret the symbols can tell us a lot. The remnants of a banner drooped from her stern, smoke-stained and ragged. The charge was one Sam had never seen before, a red eye with a black pupil beneath a black iron crown supported by 2 crows.
Awesome. Yeah, I was pretty excited when I realized that this God's Eye image was already in the books, because I pieced it together first, and then I looked at Euron's sigil, and I was like, holy shitballs, there it is!
Yeah. Yeah, it's and this ties even more into the Bloodstone Emperor stuff. Euron is, that imagery is just right in line. I mean, it's not a perfect match, but it matches better than anything else.
And then we've got, again, we mentioned the parallels to the Bloodstone Emperor, but the whole idea of having one eye, or specifically of a one-eyed sorcerer, is important in its own right. We've got Odin, which is really the source of all of this, Odin and Yggdrasil. And of course, in the story, we have Bloodraven. And Bloodraven is essentially, he's based really heavily on Odin and Yggdrasil. And Odin is a god. So the whole God's Eye idea is floating around there. But think about this. If the moon and sun alignment is the celestial God's Eye, like I'm saying, then the comet essentially gouged out the eye. It essentially poked the eye. And if we look at the combined myth animation again, the Michael Klarfeld myth, since it's so much fun, we have good excuse to look at it again. You can see the eye gouging.
Yeah.
It's that comet poking it right in the eyeball.
And that's somewhat reminiscent, or maybe even definitely reminiscent, of the Eye of Sauron as well. George R. R. Martin's a big fan of Sauron and the Lord of the Rings. So, of course, it's going to influence him as he read it as a child. Shay will pull up the Sauron eye image here if she hasn't already. And as you can see, this imagery is very plain. This is a ubiquitous type of symbol that appears in a lot of places, but it always has a similar meaning, at least, from a rough point of view, if not more specifically. Now, let's also look at the Martell Sigil, which you should be familiar with, but it's important to take another look at in this context.
It is a sun transfixed by a spear.
Yeah. Unbowed, unbent, unbroken, and very, very cool. Actually, very, very hot. That's a sun. Haha. And you can see that, so that kind of ties in a little bit at the very least. That's a very similar type of thing.
We don't have to pull it back up, but a couple of the images of the circle with a line through it from the cave almost make the circle look like a ring with sort of a shaft running through it. And that is a very close match to this sun spear image. And in general, it creates the idea of something going through the middle of that double circle, which, again, I would suggest is the comet.
Ah, yes. That would make a lot of sense.
Now, most people, cough, cough, Aziz and Ashea, agreed that the symbols in the cave, weren't taken from the books.
Right.
But we've actually cut against that a little bit already. But I found, because, we saw the Crow's Eye banner and the God's Eye Lake. But here's this is just a tasty quote that I found. This is basically Yoren recreating what appears to be a phi symbol, and specifically tied to the God's Eye. You want to read this one?
Yeah, here we go. Yeah, it's funny because, like I said, the symbols aren't maybe directly taken from the books, but some of them kind of are, in a sense. David's right that we maybe pushed that a little bit in the wrong direction too much, because it's just not as obvious. You caught some of them that we didn't tie together. But anyway, here's the quote, and I agree, this is basically what he's doing here. He picked up a long stick and drew a circle in the mud, a line trailing down from it. That's God's Eye. With the river flowing south, we're here. He poked a hole beside the line of the river under the circle. He poked a hole, of course. We can't go round west of the lake like I thought. East takes us back to the King's Road. He moved the stick up to where the line and circle met. Near as I recall, there's a town here. The Holdfast Stone, and there's a lordling got his seat there too. Just a tower house, but he'll have a guard, might be a knight or two. We follow the river north, should be there before dark. They'll have boats, so I mean to sell all we got and hire us one. He drew the stick up through the circle of the lake from bottom to top. Bottom to top. So he basically just drew a line through it. Gods be good, we'll find a wind and sail across the God's Eye to Harrentown. He thrust the point down at the top of the circle. We can buy new mounts there or else take shelter at Harrenhal.
So there you have it. It basically seems like a phi, and specifically it's a lowercase phi, where the vertical line extends past the circle on the bottom but not the top. And this is being drawn as a representation of the God's Eye. So now we've joined the circle with a line through it and the spiral that Phi implies to the God's Eye. And that fits with everything I'm saying as far as the God's Eye representing the sun and the moon and all the rest of the crap.
Mind blown.
And then Aziz did a good job of highlighting the thrusty language in there. We pokes a hole and thrusts the point down at the top of the circle. So,
I love talking about thrusting and poking.
Well, that's what Lightbringer is all about, my friend.
That's true.
As we've
really.
covered up.
That is what we've heard.
Yeah, I've made I made so many dick jokes on my podcast series that I had to balance it out by creating a series about goddesses. Which is exactly what I did.
Well played. Well played.
Now, the best thing of all, and several people have pointed this out. Good job, you smart.
I think it was Nose Kills that pointed it out earlier. Good job, Nose Kills.
Yeah, Duke Chronic also.
Okay, cool,
we saw this. We saw the fiery circle with a circle within a circle, combined with a circle with a line through it, in the shot of Dany walking into Drogo's pyre to wake the dragons. And here we'll give you the overhead image.
Yeah, Shay's pulling that up now.
And this perfectly matches my logo, and Euron's sigil, and the lake, and Klarfeld's moon and sun eclipse alignment. I mean, by now this should really pop out to you after all the image you've seen.
Yeah.
And I actually made an image that have all these together, and that's the God's Eye hex photo. No pun intended there with the hex. But here you can see all of the images and how they compare.
Hey, and look at that. Shay's pulling this up, and we've got the Game of Thrones title shot included in this God's Eye hex. That glowing sun-like thing is supposed to be the sun. I mean, that's the astrolabe. I mean, that's what an astrolabe is supposed to do.
Right. So and we're talking about that, the sort of spinning doohickey we see in the opening credits. You also see it in the Citadel.
Yeah.
The important thing is that it's meant to be a solar system. Like the spinning outer spheres represent the other planets, and they use this to track the movements of the heavens. So that glowing thing in the middle is definitely a sun, and that means that whatever this black disk in front of the sun is, it's creating an eclipse. And then we've got the bar across the middle, so that's putting the line through it. And I would say that line, represents the comet, or just the crossing out of the symbol, or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, in any case, it ends up basically making the same symbol any way you look at it, whatever it's supposed to mean. It certainly has that representation. And
now
it all just looks like different forms of eclipses. You've got some sort of sun image being blocked by something else, but the sun is still, behind it.
So here's the really important thing about this scene with Dany hatching the dragons. Drogo calls Dany the moon of my life, and Dany calls Drogo her sun and stars, which means that Dany represents the moon and Drogo the sun. And that means that Drogo's funeral pyre symbolizes the fire of the sun. And Dany is the moon maiden wandering too close to that fire, just like the Carthene tail. Now, when Dany creates this alignment, the dragons are born. And that's a match for the Carthene tail, where the dragon meteors are born when the moon wanders too close to the sun and cracks open.
Perfect.
As above, so below.
And this image of Dany walking into the pyre is, so you like you said, this is the creating the sun and moon alignment. And the idea that, this is something we're gonna talk about a bit more later, but the idea that the others have been waiting for, the stars to be right. The stars need to align a certain way for them to rise again. That is a kind of story that's told throughout fantasy and horror and a lot of different forms of fiction. That's kind of an old trope that's been used in a lot of places because it dates back to our own human history of people talking about prophecies and when, a comet is in the sky, this and sort of thing will happen. And people, ancient humans made prophecies around stuff happening in the sky all the time. So that it fits in well with fantasy when there's real magic in play as well. So, and you can even see, if Ashay could pull the pyre back up here, you can even see that there's even a suggestion of a line through the middle. It's like the kindling. You can kind of see it's like if you look 180 degrees opposite from where it starts, like at the bottom right there, you can see Dany's footprints. It kind of completes the line. Kind of like what Yoren was drawing in the dirt to represent the God's Eye. There's a bit of a parallel there, if not a strong parallel.
Right. So what I'm saying is that Danny walking into this pyre symbolizes the sun and moon celestial alignment, and then D&D chose to have it contain the same symbol that Yoren drew to represent the God's Eye. So all of that makes me think that, you know, in the scenario that my general theory is close to the truth, that Dave and Dan are somewhat clued into it, and that this moon disaster that caused the long night thing is, well, it's something they're planning on using, at least a part of it. Now, the big question is how much. So in the books, I'm definitely predicting that we're going to get another moon, comet, meteor event. Although I will say that we can't lose the entire moon or else the Planetos is going to be fairly fucked. So what I'm looking for is maybe just like a chipping off of some meteors, but it's not important. The point is, in the books, I do think we're going to get meteors that cause the new long night. That's like my one big prediction. And if it happens, I expect all of you to join my Patreon. And
that's fair.
If not, then who knows? Maybe I'll start writing my own book or something. But in the show, I'm not sure that they're going to do that whole thing. It kind of makes sense. I mean, they pare down everything magical in the show, so I'm not really counting on that. But maybe they'll just use the eclipse. You know, like we saw Sam looking at all those eclipses. It's actually a mimicking of a 14th century eclipse chart by somebody called Al-Biruni. He's an Arabic scholar. But everybody remembers those eclipses. And all the scenes that we saw in the Citadel, all the pages that Sam looked at were important. They had information about his own eye or Dragonglass. And then we see this page full of eclipses. So, like, why are eclipses important? I'm potentially giving you the answer.
Yeah, and of course they don't want it to come out of nowhere. I kind of agree with you that it might not be like a literal meteor in the show because that might seem kind of out of nowhere to viewers, but book readers like us will not be caught off guard if that happens in the books because y'all have been prepared for it, and yeah, and there's a lot to suggest this possibility.
And at the very least, I think they'll probably use the eclipse thing because it just seems really easy to do, and it'll look super creepy up there in the sky. And they're setting up the imagery for it, so
yeah,
we'll see.
It's really cool. So let's move on to our next bit, which is we're calling the Eye of Horus / Lake of Fire. Now, LmL didn't just pull this idea of the sun and the moon being God's eye out of his, well, you know, I think it's been explained pretty well so far. It's not coming out of his butt. The idea of perceiving the sun and the moon as eyes of God is also a really, really old human concept, as old as time, as old as the concept of celestial bodies. And so is, as I said a minute ago, the idea that the stars have to align a certain way. And the reason I'm wearing my H.P. Lovecraft shirt today is because this really ties into H.P. Lovecraft, who used this device in some of his most famous works. George R. Martin in the prologue of Game of Thrones is very, very Lovecraft. The idea of an ancient evil race coming back after being gone for so long that they were relegated to the status of myth and legend. So that these characters who witness them are so terrified because they're seeing something that they can't explain that shouldn't be. They can't go out and tell other people that they saw this because no one will believe them. And to back that idea up, look at what trouble Jon Snow is having now, just getting the idea that this is real to people who should believe him. And he's got an honest reputation, yet it's still a hard sell. So that's what those brothers were feeling in that first chapter. They're like, we can't even explain this. And that's very much Lovecraft, someone being driven to such primal fear that they basically crack and become
if I could,
something
Aziz,
else.
let me give a shout out to your episode that you did on the prologue. It was super awesome. I really loved it.
Thanks.
And you did a good job of tying the Lovecraft stuff to it. So if you're interested in this theme, definitely check out the History of Westeros episode on the prologue.
Yeah, that's actually a patrons only episode right now. You can also get it through donation. But yeah, well, I didn't mean for that to be a plug, but there we go.
Well.
And so David is going to read some quotes that I found. I've been reading David's quotes and he's reading ours. So this is how we do it. Now, this is just look at how H.P. Lovecraft describes the idea of the stars aligning, which allows an ancient race to return. Look at this concept and apply it to A Song of Ice and Fire loosely and just see where George might have been getting some of this. This is from the Call of Cthulhu.
They all died vast epochs of time before men came. But there were arts which could revive them when the stars had come round again to the right positions in the cycle of eternity.
And then this.
When the stars were right, they could plunge from world to world through the sky. But when the stars were wrong, they could not live. But although they no longer lived, they would never really die.
Yeah, so obviously they're not jumping from world to world, and they don't predate men because they seem to have been men before they became White Walkers. But the idea of waiting for the stars to be just right. And it occurs to me that maybe they're waiting for the stars to be as they were when they were created. That might be it. It might be that exact alignment that they're waiting for again, and that would be why it's thousands and thousands of years later. But outside of fiction, this is Lovecraft, isn't necessarily a parallel, even though thematically it seems to fit very well.
Hold on, before we go on to the Horus, I just really quick, somebody in the chat mentioned A Color Out of Space and a Caspar, and that is a big fat bingo. We talked about that in the Great Empire of the Dawn episode. In The Color Out of Space, there's a meteor that lands, and it basically sucks all the color and the life out of the landscape around it and turns everything into gray ash. And I think that that absolutely could be the explanation for Ashai having that shadow all over the Shadowlands. Is there's a poisonous meteor in the heart of the shadow, and it's basically turning everything all oily and black and dark and stuff. So yeah, that's a good comment by Anna.
Yeah, good catch. Yeah. By the way, Color Out of Space, I think might be my favorite H.P. Lovecraft story, just for the record. So highly recommend that one. All H.P. Lovecraft stuff. One of the great thing about H.P. Lovecraft is that he's been dead for so long that everything's public domain. You can go to hplovecraft.com and read every single thing he's ever written for free. So
look, there. Lady Nightwind, who's actually my friend in real life.
Oh yeah, hey there, Lady Nightwind. Super chat. What does she got here?
She of the Lucifer's handmaidens, forging Lightbringer one victim at a time.
She says, Dune, Lord of the Rings, and A Song of Ice and Fire. The connected symbolism is inarguable and warms my nerdy little heart. Thanks for pointing that out. Yours truly, Lucifer's handmaidens, forging Lightbringer one victim at a time. Well said. Thank you very much for that, Lady Nightwind.
Okay, so Horus me.
Yeah, Horus. Okay, so I was going to say, outside of fiction, the even better known, perhaps, than Odin is the Egyptian sky god Horus. I keep saying Horus. I don't know why. Whose right eye was the sun, and whose left eye was the moon. So it's sort of like his eyes are, that merging. And it describes the lunar cycle of waxing and waning a bit. And it explains why the moon was not as bright as the sun. Or rather, to explain why the moon was not as bright as the sun, the Egyptians told a story of Horus's left lunar eye being removed by the evil Set in battle, only to be remade by Khonshu, the moon god. So again, we have someone losing an eye. In fact, the Egyptians perceived the entire sky as the face of Horus, which Shea is going to pull up this image here of Horus Sun Moon, unless she already has, which makes sense if the sun and moon are his eyes. And we see that Martin has given a direct call out to this concept way back in A Clash of Kings.
And I will just real quickly while we've got the image up, you can see the solar disk is red and has the snake, and then the lunar disk has the crescent, and it's actually yellow. You might think that yellow is the sun. It's actually yellow is the moon in Egyptian art, and red is the sun. Right. In any case, because in Egypt the sun can kill you very easily, so it's more associated with red and blood and death.
Our favorite things.
So here is Martin giving a direct call out to Horus, whose face is the sky and whose eyes are the sun and moon. And this is from A Clash of Kings. Catlin raised her eyes to where the faint red line of the comet traced a path across the deep blue sky like a long scratch across the face of God.
How about that?
So there you have it. And not only that, it's the red comet. Look, hey, scratching God's face, which is the sky. And after this line, Kat and Brynden the Blackfish Tully debate the meaning of the comet for a moment, and we get this line from Blackfish. Was there ever a war? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, okay. Was there ever a war where only one side bled? Her uncle gave a shake of the head. The Riverlands are awash in blood and flame all around the God's eye. Interesting wording there, Blackfish.
Interesting wording. And what we're going to get into here is basically a symbolic association. So I said that the sun corresponds to the lake, God's eye, and the pupil, the moon, corresponds to the Isle of Faces. And so in order to support this, what George essentially does is he creates symbolic associations between the God's Eye lake and fire and between the Isle of Faces and the moon. And so this is going to be a little bit of symbolic evidence. So don't take this too literally, but check out the implications that he's creating here. So let's see. So the one you just read, blood and flame all around the God's Eye, right?
Yeah.
This fits the idea of the celestial God's Eye pretty well. The blood here would be a euphemistic reference to moon blood. because when the moon cracks open, it bleeds moon blood, right? And
What
then
else
the
would it
fire.
bleed?
What else would it bleed, right? So then, and actually, every time there's a reference to moon blood in the whole story, there's double entendres about the moon and astronomy. If you listen to my podcast, you'll see that that's what I think. In any case, the fire and blood coming from the god's eye, that's the blood. The fire would be the fiery meteors that drank the sun's fire. And again, they talk about this right after the comet was seen to be scratching God's face. So it's kind of like a sequence. The comet scratches God's face, and then we get blood and fire coming from the god's eye. Now, this phrase is repeated when Tywin, the solar lion, gives the order to set the Riverlands afire.
And here we go with the quote. It is, "Unleash Sir Gregor and send him before us with his Reavers. Send forth Vargo Hoat and his free riders as well, and Sir Amory Lorch. Each is to have 300 horse. Tell them I want to see the Riverlands afire from the God's Eye to the Red Fork." Well, he got it. He got his wish. Arya gets a first-hand glimpse of this action. Here's another quote. "All the other places they'd come upon had been empty and desolate. Farms, villages, castles, septs, barns, it made no matter. If it could burn, the Lannisters had burned it. If it could die, they'd killed it. They had even set the woods ablaze where they could, though the leaves were still green and wet from recent rains, and the fires had not spread. They would have burned the lake if they could have," Gendry had said. There it is. And Arya knew he was right. On the night of their escape, the flames of the burning town had shimmered so brightly on the water that it had seemed that the lake was afire. When they finally summoned the nerve to steal back into the ruins the next night, nothing remained but blackened stones, the hollowed shells of houses and corpses.
All right, so that's 3 times we've been given some version of a line about the God's Eye being on fire, with the last quote being the most explicit, actually saying the lake looked like it was on fire. Then when we saw, when Arya comes back the next day, check out what she sees. She sees blackened stones and the hollow shells of houses and corpses. But since the moon was an egg before it gave birth to the dragon meteors, which are like blackened stones, after it cracked open, it would have been a hollow shell. So those blackened stones and hollow shells that we see after the lake looks afire, this is more of a sequence thing. The God's Eye is on fire. We get hollow shells and then blackened stones and, of course, corpses, because when the blackened stones fell from the sky, they made many corpses.
Now, David, LML rather, I can't stop calling you David, but oh well.
That's cool. That's cool.
Something is just now occurring to me, and maybe you've noticed this before, but think of the God's Eye during the Dance of the Dragons when Caraxes and Vhagar fought above the God's Eye, wrapped into each other and killed each other in midair, basically. Well, they weren't both dead by that time, but then they slammed into the God's Eye, and then Vhagar actually crawled back out. And their flames made the lake boil.
Don't forget that Daemon Blackfire stabbed Aemon One Eye in the eye.
Yes, in the eye as he was plummeting into the God's Eye. It's the symbolism is just rampant in that scene. But
it's actually even better than that, because right before Daemon attacks, he climbs up, he flies up really high, and then attacks from the direction of the sun, which means he's creating the moon eclipse in front of the sun, so and then diving down from the sun like a meteor.
Wow. Perfect.
So there's like 4 metaphors in that battle that are all basically telling the same story. It's one of my favorites.
Really, really cool. Yeah, it's so good. I was pretty sure we had talked about that before, but I couldn't remember it, and we definitely didn't include it in the script, and I realized that it belongs. Yeah, that's a great.
Oh yeah, the dragon battles in The Princess and the Queen are just great. And there's also one where Sunfire and Moon Dancer collide and burn each other and then fall to the ground.
Oh yeah, you're right. And one of them is blinded by it too.
And the blinding is important too, because if the moon is an eye, then it's being blinded. So yeah.
And you're not supposed to stare at the sun too. No. Don't stare at the eclipse. You go blind.
And then the last little bit is the Roloris. When they pray to a fiery eye. And the quote is, "O Lord of light, we beseech you, cast your fiery eye upon us and keep us safe and warm." And of course, they also worship the sun, and they think that the sun comes from R'hllor. It's a gift of R'hllor. So essentially, they're worshiping the Eye of Sauron, which is another reason why the R'hllors creep everybody out.
Right on. Okay, so we have 2 sections left. I'm not sure we're going to have time for both of them. David, you can let us know what your schedule is. I know you have to get to another show around 6. We still have time. So we'll just keep going, and you let us know when we're out of time.
Okay, so the God's Eye Lake has been associated with fire, and that makes it a fiery eye. And the sun looks like a fiery eye. So now let's talk about the moon. The moon is connected to eyes a bunch of times in A Song of Ice and Fire. First, we have 2 explicit quotes, with this one coming from a Tyrion chapter of A Dance with Dragons.
Here we go. A full moon floated above the mast. It's following me downriver, watching me like some great eye. And then this one coming at Ramsay and Jane Poole, fake Arya that is, in the Winterfell Godswood. Up above the treetops, a crescent moon was floating in a dark sky, half obscured by mist, like an eye peering through a veil of silk. Yeah.
There you go. And then those 2 quotes are followed up by 5 other quotes where the moon's described in ocular language, if you will, such as peering, peeping, or peeking. And even one time it's playing peek and sneak among the chimneys, as if it were Mary fucking Poppins or something. Hey, governor. Cheer up, sport. Anyways, so then we have more people with moon eyes, which is sort of flipping it around. Instead of describing the moon as an eye, we have people whose eyes look like moons. Hot Pie gapes at Arya with big moon eyes. Roose Bolton glances at reeked out Theon with eyes as pale and strange as 2 white moons. There's a 2 moons reference for you. And better still is the shadow cat that Jon sees when climbing the frost fangs in A Clash of Kings.
Off in the darkness, a shadow cat screamed in fury, its voice bouncing off the rocks so it seemed as though a dozen other cats were giving answer. Once Jon thought he saw a pair of glowing eyes on a ledge overhead, as big as harvest moons.
That's a really cool one because this is essentially a nighttime version of the face of Horus. So Horus's face is the sky. His eyes are the sun and moon. Here we have a night sky with 2 moon eyes. And what's cool is that the shadow cat's body is basically invisible. It blends into the surrounding darkness. So all Jon sees is these floating eyes that are like 2 moons.
Yeah.
So the moon is an eye. The sun is an eye. If they're in a solar eclipse alignment, you'd have the double circle shape, especially if the moon were a little smaller than our moon, which most moons are, actually. And this would make the fiery god's eye lake and the sun the iris. Like I said, the moon would be the pupil. So imagine my delight upon finding that twice in Bran's Greenseer training montage chapter in A Dance with Dragons, we get the line, the moon was a black hole in the sky, because that would make it a better pupil, because pupils are black holes that drink in light. And now we have the moon playing a black hole that drinks in light. So that's pretty sweet.
Yeah, perfect. And as for the idea of a stellar black hole, like another word for that would be like a dark star, especially from the perspective of ancient people who don't have like proper astronomy.
Star.
What's that?
A dark star.
A dark star. Yes, he's there's no man like him, and any viper that takes a bite out of this planet will rue. Yeah.
But just since you mentioned Dark Star, what does Dark Star do? He slashes Myrcella across the face. And Myrcella is a moon maiden in that scene. So this is a crack across the face of the moon being performed by a dark sword dude named Dark Star.
Yeah. So consider that this moon explosion would be fiery for a moment, like it would blow up, there'd be like something big in the sky, but really the long term of that is the debris, smoke and ash. And hey, what would that do? That would blot the sun and cause a lot of darkness, like maybe, I don't know, the long night maybe? Yeah, it fits really well. Again, magic combined with naturalistic explanations. It isn't just some magic spell that caused the sun to go away. There's got to be a real, like, logistical reason for this, even if it's just super cosmic and kind of, well, literally out of this world. It still can't just be just like a magical screen in front of the sun. Like, it makes a lot more sense to have a real explanation, which is celestial debris. Exploding moon would do that sort of thing. That makes a lot of sense. And I mean, if our real moon exploded, let alone, forget all the other damage that would do, but it would cause the sky to be darker for a long time.
So it's necessary to just like satisfy the more scientifically minded people in the crowd. If a moon actually exploded, the planet would probably be doomed. The meteors would be so big, we'd have planet sterilization and all kinds of things. So it's important to realize that I'm not proposing this like a science fiction theory. I'm not saying the mechanics work out. What I'm saying is that George bases his magic ideas on things that happen in nature. And a comet impact can cause an impact winter that blocks out the sun and lowers the temperature. And he's just taken that idea and running with it and making a fantasy version of it. Just like the Doom of Valyria, it's not important to figure out like how many volcanoes there were and how big the explosion was and all that crap. It doesn't matter. It's a big volcanic explosion. It's got magic in it. And so it leaves a fallout zone that lasts for 400 years. So that's the context in which I'm talking about this. I don't want anyone to take it overly literally. But the point is that as far as the black hole thing, right after the fiery explosion, it turns into a big black smudge. And so essentially the sun is turned into a dark star when it is blinded. And that's why Euron is so important here, because that banner that we saw earlier, it was described as smoke stained and ragged. And that's kind of a clue about the smoke that comes from the god's eye. And there's many other clues about that too.
Cool.
So now I showed how the god's eye lake can be connected to the sun, and connecting the Isle of Faces to the moon is like way easy. So check this out. First of all, the moon has always been seen as having a face in it, which is called the man in the moon. And Ashay has got an image for that. But you're all familiar with what the man in the moon looks like, obviously. So the Carthian legend, of course, speaks of a crack.
Image up. Yep.
The Carthian legend speaks of a crack across the face of the moon. And the face of the moon line appears a bunch of times in A Song of Ice and Fire. It's pretty common. Many people in A Song of Ice and Fire have moon faces. Sam has a moon face no less than 4 times. Varys, dressed up as a woman, has a moon face. Willis Manderly has a moon face. And the wight that Jon fights in Mormont's chambers also has a moon face. More importantly, we've seen that weirwood moon faces exist. It's a thing. And of course, the Isle of Faces is so named because of the many heart trees that have faces on them. So we've got the weirwood and ebony doors at the House of Black and White, which have kind of like a yin-yang moon face, which is half weirwood. But most importantly, Arya says that it reminds her of the heart tree in Winterfell's Godswood. And she says it.
Yeah, I was going to read this quote, but I wanted to back up just a second to say that it's important to remember that the faces on the Isle of Faces in the center of the God's Eye apparently were carved during, like, when the pact was signed, which is an interesting little side tidbit there that's important and worth mentioning, I think. So here's the quote. Sorry, go ahead. You have more to say on that?
I was just going to say, it has to do with the idea of the children and the first men working together, which is right at the heart of everything we're talking about, especially in the show terms. So go ahead.
Cool. All right. So the quote is, it was a white weirwood, and there was a face on it. Or sorry, it was white weirwood, and there was a face on it. This is the door again. A glow came from the wood, like milk and moonlight, so faint it scarcely seemed to touch anything beyond the door itself, not even Sam, standing right before it. Like milk and moonlight, yep.
So there you go. It's a weirwood face that glows with moonlight. And then there's also the moon door in the Eyrie, which is made out of weirwood. It doesn't have a face, but it still shows that Martin is creating this association between the moon and weirwood trees. So the Isle of Faces, chock full of weirwood trees, makes a pretty good stand-in for the moon. The moon, which is the pupil.
The moon is what cats call it. Sorry.
That joke was a catastrophe.
Yeah. Someone just typed in the show, that was a joke. Or no, I don't know if you...
Yeah, something else.
Oh, that wasn't to me, but still, that was good timing with that comment.
It works. So, saving the best moon eye quote for last, and this is a really great one. I give you Bloodraven, in disguise as Maynard Plum in The Mystery Knight.
Which, by the way, just came out on graphic novel form and is wonderful. Here's the quote. Dunk whirled. Through the rain, all he could make out was a hooded shape and a single pale white eye. It was only when the man came forward that the shadowed face beneath the cowl took on the familiar features of Sir Maynard Plum, the pale eye no more than the moonstone brooch that pinned his cloak at the shoulder. Moonstone,
dun, dun,
eh?
dun. Now, of course, this is important because it connects the moon eye symbol to Bloodraven, who's a one-eyed greenseer. And as I mentioned, anyone with a basic knowledge of Norse myth will know that pretty much all one-eyed magicians in the wide world of mythology and fantasy fiction are taking after Odin, who sacrificed one of his physical eyes to open his third eye and gain divine sight and knowledge. Now, also said a large part of the weirwood and greenseer relationship is based on Odin and Yggdrasil. We don't really have time to get into that. Feel free to check out my podcast for more info. But the important thing is that Odin is a god, and he has one eye. And Bloodraven is modeled on Odin, and his one eye is like the moon. So, the fact that Bloodraven's eye is put out by the arrow of Daemon Blackfire, as you mentioned, is a hint
Ooh,
about
that would
the
be
God's
by
Eye.
that would be by Bittersteel, but close enough.
Oh, Bittersteel. Sorry,
Yeah.
my bad. Well, they were fighting Daemon Blackfire, but in any
Yes.
case, Bloodraven's eyes put out by the arrow of Bittersteel, and that would be, in my mind, a
Well, his
comparison
sword,
to the...
similar difference, you know.
Oh, all wrong. Well, sword's actually even better, so that
Yeah.
works.
Maybe maybe it may have been Blackfire, the sword itself, that took Bloodraven's eye out, which is even cooler.
So how does that happen? How do you take somebody's eye out but not kill them with the sword? Exactly?
I guess it's a glancing blow. Maybe because he had a helmet and the visor prevented the sword from penetrating too deep.
Oh, okay. So we just got like poked a little bit.
Yeah.
Well, if it was Blackfire, that'd be perfect because Blackfire is a terrific Lightbringer symbol, in my opinion.
Yeah, and what happens is Bittersteel does his mad charge after he sees Daemon die, and he recovers the sword, and then it's unclear whether he recovers the sword and then fights Bloodraven, or if he fights Bloodraven and then gets the sword. But it feels like he gets the sword first because after he hurts Bloodraven, he retreats. So it would be hard for him to grab the sword and retreat. I would think he would already have grabbed it. So I think that's what happened, but it's not explicitly confirmed.
Well, fingers crossed for Blackfire Rebellion HBO spinoff. So
yes, please give us that.
In any case, this Bloodraven's eyes are associated with the moon, and one of them is plucked out with a sword, and this would be a parallel to the celestial god's eye being struck with a comet. And then in the prologue, we see Waymar, his eye is put out by one of the needle-like shards of his broken sword. And then we've also got just a ton of other one-eyed people in the story. There's Euron, and Beric was a really important one because Beric is giving us the Azor Ahai flaming sword symbolism along with the one-eye symbolism. And then he sits in a Weirwood throne in a Weirwood cave. So that's a big piece of evidence for my Azor Ahai is a Greenseer theory. It's basically Beric combining Greenseer and Azor Ahai symbolism together in one.
Boom.
So let's see here. Quick note on Euron. I think that Euron's name is taken from the Jovian moon, and that means moon of Jupiter, named Europa, because Euron, Europa. And then in the Forsaken chapter, they compare Euron's face to the moon. It said, do you remember that line? It said, the moon has Euron's leering face.
I do vaguely remember that, yeah.
So that kind of cinches it. Like, you've got a character, Euron, who seems to be named after Europa, a moon, and then he's got a moon face. So now read this quote from the Forsaken.
Here we go. The dreams were even worse the second time. He saw the long ships of the Ironborn adrift and burning on a boiling, blood-red sea. He saw his brother on the Iron Throne again, but Euron was no longer human. He seemed more squid than man, a monster fathered by a kraken of the deep, his face a mass of writhing tentacles. So the boiling blood sea is the burning moon blood symbol that LmL was speaking of, and that's another H.P. Lovecraft reference. That tentacle face kraken of the deep is basically Cthulhu himself, or itself. I don't think he has gender, but it's very much a good likeness of this so-called vortex coming from the God's Eye Sun-Moon alignment.
Or at least it could be, and that's the thing that struck me is because Euron's eyes are heavily associated with this whole God's Eye thing. Yeah. And then we've got his face turning into a tentacle vortex. That's, to me, a good image of like the darkness, the clouds of darkness coming out of the God's Eye. So
right on. So we have one more section. As we move into this last section, I would like to remind people that you can do super chats. I should point out that unfortunately Apple devices don't have super chat, so if you're wondering what we're talking about and you have an Apple device, well, that explains it. And also, if you're watching live, if you could do us a favor and hit that like button, it'll really help this video get noticed, especially since we're not publishing it as a podcast. We want to make sure it gets a little extra boost so people know about it. All right, so let's go on to this last section, which is called The Hammer of the Waters. Take it away, LmL.
Okay, so for you show watchers, this is going to be something to try to hopefully convince you that you need to read the books because there's a lot going on in the books. But this is going to kind of augment and feed into what the show is doing with the interaction of the children and the White Walkers, I believe. So the final piece of the puzzle is the Hammer of the Waters. The Hammer of the Waters was said to have been called down by the Greenseers on the Isle of Faces. But I long ago proposed that the Hammer of the Waters was actually a moon meteor event that happened at the time of the Long Night and not thousands of years before. The full evidence for that is on my podcast series called The Bloodstone Compendium, and we don't need to go into all the detail. So just consider the hypothesis, okay, that the Hammer of the Waters is a moon meteor impact. And in fact, so I don't know if you caught this, Aziz, but somebody did an article recently saying that a meteor impact was actually a better explanation for the collapse of a land bridge than an earthquake. And it went into talking about, or no, it was actually talking about Valyria.
Oh.
That's what it was. It was noticing that the entire peninsula of Valyria broke and became separated and detached when the smoking sea came rushing in. And they were saying, like, look, that's like 300 or 400 miles across, and earthquakes never really can go anywhere near that big as far as creating land subsistence, but a meteor hitting on a certain trajectory could easily create an impact crater that big. And the same sort of logic applies to the Arm of Dorn. So
right on.
There you have it.
Real quick before you get farther into this, I want to point out how amazing the comments section is right now. People are making all kinds of jokes. We got Iron Throne saying the hammer emoji with the clock emoji, calling it hammer time. We have we have people also saying can't touch this and it's hammer time. Yeah, so y'all are right there with us with the puns. We're all a good team here.
Yeah, we make a lot of jokes on my podcast because symbolism is full of jokes. And,
you can't not get some jokes in there, yeah.
And a lot of them are dick jokes. So there you go.
But
now
where are we at? Is this on go ahead.
So I'm going back to talking about the hammer. So
gotcha.
The interesting thing to me is that the spiral design superimposed over the sun is superimposed in the sun over the caves, but then we also saw it radiating from the weirwood tree in the overhead shot, and we talked about that earlier. And I think this makes sense because what this gets down to is the cause of the long night. I don't think it was a thing that just happened. I think all the myths in the story suggest that there was some original sin, some reaching for the fire of the gods, something that a human magician did in order to cause the comet to hit the moon. And I would only think that this has to be green seer magic. So it sounds far-fetched. I will grant you that.
But I think it makes more sense than green seer magic breaking the arm of Dorn. Like them having magic that powerful seems actually more far-fetched than a natural disaster or a semi-natural disaster. So and maybe the green seers can kind of tap into that, maybe not cause it to happen, but like push it along and kind of give it a boost,
So there's I've got two theories about how it is that you can steer a comet. One would be the horn, because the horn's called Dragon Binder, so maybe it's actually Comet Binder.
Oh,
right. And then the sound of the horn is described as a shivering hot scream, which reminds me of Nissa Nissa's scream that cracked the moon. And then it also says the sound split the air like a sword thrust. So we're being given the idea that it's a sound that's a sword, and that could have something to do with it. And then the other idea is just the idea of astral projection. When you go in the weirwood net, you can fly. And this is what Bran does. He flies around, and he even sees all of Westeros. He can see all the way over to Ashai. It sounds like he's way up high in the sky. And my friend Ravenous Reader has some really great theories about this. So shout out to Ravenous Reader. But essentially, I think it might have something to do with that if it's possible to steer a comet. So even though it's far-fetched, essentially any of this is far-fetched. Any idea about the children of the forest causing the hammer of the waters is far-fetched. Whether it's an earthquake through vibrational singing and blood magic, or it's summoning down moon meteors, we've not seen the children of the forest do anything like this. So in either scenario, we have to entertain the idea that the children of the forest can do a lot more than what we've seen so far in the books. And I think that's likely to be the case.
Yeah, I'm with you.
So if the Hammer of the Waters is a moon meteor, well, we're told that on the Isle of Faces, we had a bunch of blood magic in order to call down the Hammer of the Waters. I think that's exactly what happened. I think that blood magic was performed on the Isle of Faces, and that this had to do with summoning the hammer in the sense of steering the comet into the moon and making the whole thing happen. So I think that the original myth is pretty close to the truth. It has a lot of things right. There's blood magic on the Isle of Faces, and there's summoning of the hammer. But the important thing is the sky-ground correlation. The Isle of Faces and the God's Eye Lake is the God's Eye on the ground, and it matches the sun and the moon up in the sky. That's the celestial God's Eye. So when they say the hammer was called down from the God's Eye, well, it was summoned from the terrestrial God's Eye, and then it fell from the celestial god's eye. So it's a very parallel, as above, so below thing. Again, if my theory is right, which who knows, maybe it's not. But there you go.
Sounds good. Yeah, I like it. It fits. It's the symbology is maybe not like, it's because some of this is maybe new to a lot of people. It's not necessarily easy to digest so many concepts at once. So some of these things might take a little, for some of you all, if it's new to you, it might take a little marinating. You might have to sit and think about some of these ideas a bit, but just notice these. The place to start is by noticing a lot of the similarities in the language and in the symbology, and the rest kind of falls into place from there.
Yeah, so let's give you some good textual clues about the Hammer of the Waters being a moon meteor. There's this great quote. Well, first of all, we've got the city named Sunspear. Okay, so a sun spear is a phrase you could use to describe a meteor that's burning with the fire of the sun, coming from this God's Eye alignment. And again, the Sunspear sigil, the Martell Sigil, kind of looks, suggests that spear falling from the sun idea. But then there's this line from A Feast for Crows, where Arya and Martell is in Dorne.
The sun was beating down like a fiery hammer, but it did not matter with their journey at its end. And turning back to the God's Eye Lake, we see a similar idea expressed, which is, here's another quote. To the east, God's Eye was a sheet of sun-hammered blue that filled half the world. Some days, as they made their slow way up the muddy shore, Gendry wanted no part of any roads, and even Hot Pie and Lamy saw the sense in that. Arya felt as though the lake were calling to her. She wanted to leap into those placid blue waters, to feel clean again, to swim and splash and bask in the sun.
So there you go. The God's Eye is a sheet of sun-hammered blue that fills the world, giving us the idea of sun hammers in conjunction with the lake. And in another Arya scene, there's a similar line that says, the setting sun made the tranquil surface of the water shimmer like a sheet of beaten copper. Now, if the Hammer of the Waters was a meteor, it may well have contained metal, and it would have looked like it filled half the world when it was about to land on everyone's head. So that all kind of matches. But check out the wordplay in that last line, okay? Because of the ambiguous wording, it's hard to tell whether Arya wants to jump into the lake or into the sun. It says, Arya felt as though the lake were calling her. She wanted to leap into those placid blue waters, to feel clean again, to swim and splash and bask in the sun. So it's like she's swimming in the sun because the lake is the sun.
Let me jump in for just a second because we're getting a ton of comments and we've had a surge in viewers, and apparently it's thanks to Kyle Foster of Azora Hype. So shout out to Kyle Foster, shout out to Azora Hype's channel. And yeah, we're seeing a whole bunch of people that say Kyle sends his regards. Hey, Kyle sent us over. So appreciate that, Kyle. And
y'all might have to back up to the beginning and watch us over again, but that's all right.
Yeah. Anyway, please continue.
So, and also I just want to say I am monitoring the chat here, and there is a lot of fun stuff going on. So we see you guys in the chat.
Yes.
And let's see here. So the point about the spirals being found over both the tree and the sun is this. Magic was performed around the trees, which brought down the moon meteors that burned with the sun's fire. I think the magic was performed on the Isle of Faces, which is a symbolic parallel to the moon, which is the target of the magic. So again, it's like a sky-ground parallel. I already said that. So let's step back. So let's wipe away my theory for a second. Let's say you don't believe in all the LmL claptrap. Just look at the basics of what's going on here. The spiral vortex appears both over the weirwood tree and over the sun. And that is telling us that green seer magic had something to do with causing the long night. Because again, I think a vortex sun is a bad sign.
Yeah, that seems pretty straightforward, doesn't it? So the last quotes we have today are about magicians using trees to pull down the moon, which is what David and we're suggesting. I called you David again. LmL is suggesting what may have went down on the Isle of Faces. Quote, Deepwood was aptly named. The trees were huge and dark, somehow threatening. Their limbs wove through one another and creaked with every breath of wind, and their higher branches scratched at the face of the moon.
Dun, dun, dun.
Dun, dun, yeah. And that's the same Asha Greyjoy chapter in A Dance with Dragons that contains one of the lines LmL caught as a clue here about the children creating the others. We briefly touched on this at the beginning, but here's the actual quote, which we only mentioned at the beginning. Asha saw only trees and shadows, the moonlit hills and the snowy peaks beyond. Then she realized that trees were creeping closer. Oh ho, she laughed. These mountain goats have cloaked themselves in pine boughs. The woods were on the move, creeping toward the castle like a slow green tide. She thought back to a tale she had heard as a child about the children of the forest and their battles with the first men when the green seers turned the trees to warriors.
Awesome. So that in that same scene that we've already talked about the trees being turned to warriors, we have the trees trying to scratch at the face of the moon. So, and you'll notice that's face of the moon reference again to make us think of the Isle of Faces. So essentially we've got children turning the trees into warriors and the trees trying to bring down the moon at the same time, which implies that it might all be connected.
Absolutely.
And
go ahead. I was going to say we have a super chat here, but you can finish your thought for sure.
I'll hit at the end of this paragraph. So then at the end of this fight in the woods with the trees trying to pull down the moon, we have Stannis running around with Lightbringer. So Stannis's burning heart banner is actually the last thing that Asha remembers seeing before she was struck on the head while backed up against a tree. Exactly like the Weirwood sacrifice, or like the Night's King in the scene where the children transformed.
Nice, nice.
So we've got a super chat from Emma Smith.
Thanks, Emma.
Arya cleansing herself in the fiery god's eye. Is that like Dany's cleansing, tempering herself in Drogo's pyre? Holla, Nissa Nissa reborn. Bingo, bingo, bingo.
Too bad Absolutely. She didn't actually get to do it. She wanted to. She wanted to cleanse and temper herself, but no.
So that's a trick that Martin does a lot of times when he wants to imply symbolism. Yeah. If he can't actually make it happen, he'll say, "I remember that time when this happened," or "I wanted to do this." That way, he doesn't have to tear out everyone's eye in order to make an eye gouging symbol. Because you can't tear everyone's eyes out. Although he tries. There's like one-eyed mules and one-eyed cats. And
that's true. There's a one-eyed cat. That's true.
There's a lot of them, dude. So, all right. Now, the last quote that we have is from the Night Fort. So go ahead and read this.
Here we go. This is great. Outside, the wind was sending armies of dead leaves marching across the courtyards to scratch faintly at the doors and windows. The sounds made him think of old Nan's stories. He could almost hear the ghostly sentinels calling to each other atop the wall and winding their ghostly war horns. Winding their ghostly war horns. Pale moonlight slanted down through the hole in the dome, painting the branches of the weirwood as they strained up toward the roof. It looked as if the tree was trying to catch the moon and drag it down into the well. Old gods, Bran prayed, if you hear me, don't send a dream tonight. Or if you do, make it a good dream. The gods made no answer.
So that's a weirwood explicitly stated to be trying to pull down the moon at the Night Fort, which means this could have something to do with Night's King, in a general sense at least. And then you'll also notice that as soon as we see the moon being pulled down into the well, Bran prays to the old gods. So it's suggesting that indeed the old gods and green seer magic have something to do with pulling down the moon. And what's even funnier is that out of the well comes Sam, who's had a moon face on 4 different occasions. So it's like the moon is pulled down into the well and then it comes back out as Sam. And that actually makes a lot of sense. If you get into my podcast in the Sacred Order of Green Zombies series, I talked about what that means, and it does mean something.
Nice. That's good. Yeah. So that's it for our scripted presentation. We can certainly take a few more questions if y'all would like to drop those in here. We certainly have one that was pulled at least from that Ashaya grabbed early on. It's from Healer 180. And the healer says, the veil is symbolized by a moon and the Martells are a sun. Please speak about this. Well, nothing immediately strikes me about that, but David, do you have any thoughts on that?
Oh, but of course.
Of course you do.
So there are different locations in the story which are used as symbols of the sun or one of the 2 moons. And my theory about the 2 moons is that one is associated with ice and one with fire because, well, it's a song of ice and fire, and why not? And there's actually more reasons why I think that's happening. But consider, so Dany is the moon maiden that I mentioned. She gives birth to the dragons. She thinks about the fire being inside her, and I am fire, and Dany is all fire. She's a moon maiden associated with fire. But then we have the Night's Queen. Her skin was as pale as the moon, but it was cold. And she has blue star eyes. And she has something to do with creating the others, I think, when she was sacrificing to the others with the Night's King. So what that means is that we've got cold moon maidens and we've got hot moon maidens. And I think that's paralleling the moons. So to get back to the question about the Eyrie is a place that symbolizes an icy moon. Everything is white and icy, and there's great symbolism going on. And there's a story to be told about each moon, essentially. So Harrenhal is a good example of the moon that exploded. All the places that are like the exploded moon are black and burnt, and has something to do with dragon fire. So like the dragon pit at King's Landing, it used to be a dome, and then it collapsed when the dragons tried to fly out of it, like they were trying to hatch out of the moon. So that's a destroyed fire moon place.
I think that was Dreamfire that caused that. Yeah, you're totally right.
And the same thing for Ashai. It's a former home of dragons that's all burnt out and blackened. Even Dragonstone, it isn't destroyed, but all the stone has been baked in dragon fire in order to create the fused stone. And so it's a black stone dragon place that is an analog for the fire moon, which was like an egg, which is a dragon stone. So there you go. So what happens with all these places tied to moons and suns is that when you have characters that are from those places, it's an easy way to give them that symbolism. So like when Oberyn fights Gregor Clegane, Oberyn is carrying all that sun symbolism into the fight. His shield looks like a sun, and he's got the spear with an oily black poison-tipped blade on it, and that's the sun using the comet as a weapon. And then Gregor has all this like stone man, flying mountain, moon imagery. And so the whole fight is actually the sun stabbing the moon. And when he stabs Gregor in the arm, like the arm of Dorne, Gregor actually puts himself with his back to the sun. So from Oberyn's point of view, Gregor's eclipsing the sun and making the eclipse.
And let's not forget, Gregor's the one who took out Barrack's eye.
Yes, he is.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, he is. So it
How
goes
convenient.
on and on. So that's the kind of long answer to that, is all of these places symbolize different parts of it. And when Martin creates the scenes, he uses that to make suns and moons sort of collide with each other.
I see a few people here in the chat are wondering who you are because they either came in late or maybe because they were sent over by Kyle. So we were going to do that at the end anyway. We're getting close to the end. Why don't we have you reintroduce yourself, tell everybody where to find you, and
so my real name is David, as you've exposed me here. And I go by Lucifer Means Lightbringer. That's kind of long, so people call me LmL. My website is lucifermeanslightbringer.com. And I've got a whole series of podcasts. I don't really I don't make a lot of videos. I've got one primary like visual presentation video. The rest are all podcasts, although my podcasts are on the YouTube channel. And what I'm doing here is I'm giving you all these ideas. I'm trying to compress them and summarize them. But to really root it in the text, you have to go and analyze scene after scene in detail, kind of like we did here real quick. And so what you find on my podcasts is we'll be exploring a lot of these ideas, but really be taking our time. And we'll be finding one symbol like the moon blood, and then we'll go through a bunch of scenes that have burning moon blood. And I will show the message that's going through all of them and then try to make it mean something. So if this all is interesting to you and you want to see it in more detail, then come check out the podcast at lucifermeanslightbringer.com. And what I'm telling you guys is that there's a whole story within a story in A Song of Ice and Fire. I think George has put a lot of effort into his background folklore and the symbolism that we're talking about here. So once you sort of get tuned in to the symbols and the metaphors that are in the story, you can reread the entire series and it will sound different to you. All kinds of things will jump out to you. And it's like reading a whole new layer of story in your favorite books, which is really awesome because these books only come out once every 6 years.
Oh, yeah, if that, right?
They read the stories over and over and over again. And by tuning into the symbolism that I talk about, and other people talk about this too, it's not just me, you can get a lot more out of the story. And I think George has put a lot of effort here. So it's worth talking about and worth taking a look at.
And you've just joined Twitter too, right? That's worth mentioning.
Yeah.
As of
Dragon LmL.
Like less than 48 hours ago, right?
Totally.
Already you're fitting in
onto
over
Twitter.
there. Yeah. So maybe also briefly explain your name. A few people, I see someone asking what's up with Lucifer means Lightbringer. What does that mean? It's
So
actually
Lucifer-
simple.
Yeah, it is. Lucifer is the Latin word for Venus when it's in the morning star position. And it's also translated as Lightbringer, Dawnbringer, Son of the Morning, and a couple other things. So
Yeah.
it's...
So your name is literally accurate. Lucifer means Lightbringer.
That's right.
Yeah, it's not some sort of devil thing, but of course, obviously, Satan does have that name in certain traditions, but that's not the reference.
Well, what's cool is that the Satan and Lucifer are both compared to Venus, the morning star, and a lot of mythological figures are based on the morning star because Venus acts really in a weird way in the sky. We don't need to go into it, but The point is that Venus appears to be sort of coming down from heaven and then going back up to heaven. And so all deities based on Venus, they do descending and ascending things. So Jesus came down to earth to save everybody, and Lucifer was kicked out of heaven, but they both fell from heaven to earth. And so that's the common mythology between them. Even though it ends up one is a good guy and one's a bad guy, they're both based on just simple mythical astronomy of Venus. So
right on.
It's good stuff.
So we have a couple of other questions that Shea grabbed, and we'll take these and then call it a day. We're a little past 2 hours, which is about what we were aiming for. But again, if you missed it, LmL is going to be over on Tony Teflon's channel in about an hour, so we have to give him time to get ready for that. But here's a couple questions from Thunderclap. Does any of this relate to Valyrian glyphs or First Men runes? Valyrian glyphs, I'm not so sure, but First Men runes, we could be seeing some of those carvings in the caves could be the equivalent of runes or actual runes. You know, I mean, that's kind of, you could call them runes. I don't know if they like are normal fits into the whatever the First Men used as language, but I think there's a very, very good chance of that. What do you think, LmL?
I think that I noticed just recently when I was looking at that Forsaken chapter that Euron's Valyrian steel armor has glyphs and whorls, and a whorl is a spiral. So maybe.
Yeah, maybe.
We'll need to know more to make an educated guess, but it's not a crackpot idea.
I see a comment from Schiff Dougler. Also, just for Aziz, go Knowles, Florida State. Yes, I'm a Florida State alum, so yeah, go Knowles, sure.
And Chris Lavallee asked about Joseph Campbell, and I love Joseph Campbell. A lot of the ideas I'm talking about are inspired by Joseph Campbell. I have a whole episode about Joseph Campbell and A Song of Ice and Fire on my website. It's under the methodology tab. It's called George R.R. Martin is Writing Modern Mythology, and I mean mythology in the Campbellian sense there. So that's right on.
Right on. Question from Everdawn. If Obsidian, Frozen Fire, had a part in the making of the White Walkers, would they also be, in their own way, another embodiment of ice and fire? Yeah.
Yes, and they are anyways because their eyes burn with cold fire. So there's an ice fire going on thing already.
Nice, yeah. Yeah, the whole war they created with Obsidian thing, that's something that I think the show might have invented on their own. It kind of conflicts with what we've seen, right? Like,
it does, yeah.
Benjen says that they stopped his the children stopped his transformation into a white by jamming Dragonglass in the same spot that they seem to have dipped Dragonglass into the first walker that they made. So, I don't know, that kind of conflicts with itself. So I'm guessing that's not a book detail. I'm guessing that's a show thing. And so, I see someone saying Obsidian made the Night King, which I can believe because I don't think the Night King is in the book. I think he's a myth, a legend, and he's not, you know, the boss other in modern times, but we'll see.
So check this out. So the others are cold. Their eyes burn, but they burn cold. So this is essentially the forces of cold burning like fire. I would call that burning ice. But then we have frozen fire, which is fire that's been frozen into a shape. Okay, so you have burning ice and frozen fire. So what's happening is that Martin is finding ways to make fire cold and ice hot, so that each one of them has an opposite yin-yang kind of a thing going on. I find that to be interesting.
That's cool. I see another comment saying, surprised that I said I went to Florida State because I'm wearing a Miskatonic University shirt. Miskatonic University is a reference to H.P. Lovecraft, but that's a great joke. Okay. Well, I think that is a good place to stop.
Actually, there's one question I've seen more than any other one.
Oh, go for it then.
It says, is George R.R. Martin this clever? And the answer is goddamn right he is.
I think so.
Why do you think it takes 5 years to write a book, guys?
Yeah, the same things that we complain about the show doing too quickly or going, moving over too quickly or being sloppy with is why George has to take his time, because it is hard to do. It's really complicated, and it's easy to make mistakes when you're dealing with so many characters at once. And of course, George is dealing with more characters than the show is by far. So I don't.
Lots of thanks to Ashea here in the credits. Once again, thank you very much. People are saying that the chat stream was great. Ashea has been dropping in there and answering questions as well as throwing images up. She probably did more work than we did on this.
It's entirely possible. One last question that I see that she's grabbed from Ori Towns. Did you think that maybe there's a separate incantation to do different things with the Dragonglass? That's certainly possible. In fact, that's how the show would pretty much have to explain it based on what they've done. But as far as the books, we don't even know if it's involved, so it's hard to make that guess and to apply it to the books. But it's possible. It's something that when the books start to reveal these things, we'll be ready for that possibility because it's been introduced to us already. And then we'll know whether it is or not. I suspect Bran's going to learn a lot in the Winds of Winter. I think most of the stuff will be revealed in the Winds of Winter rather than in A Dream of Spring, because it seems like, well, based on the title and where Bran is right now, and because if he learned those stuff in the show at the same time, you know, before coming back to the Wall, pretty good chance we get that stuff in the Winds of Winter. But maybe some more of it will be in A Dream of Spring. We'll see. We'll see. But yes, thank very much to Ashea for all her work with all the... We were pushing her in all kinds of different directions with these images, and she kicked ass. Thanks to everybody who joined and everyone who's hitting the like button. Hopefully we send a lot more people over to you, LML, and your channel, because it's well worth it. Certainly be aware that he has a Patreon rather, just like us, so you can certainly support one or both of us on there. We both have a lot of different patron-only bonuses and things like that we give out, so it's worth checking out.
We have a lot of mutual patrons, too.
We do have a lot of mutual patrons. A lot of people follow both of our shows. Same with Radio Westeros and a lot of the other great creators out there. So...
Thanks to Michael Klarfeld again for those animations, of course.
Yes.
And that's Claradox.de. I'll actually spell that Klaradox.de. You can find... He's got the Essos map. He's got the a cool board game that's really fun to print out and play. I actually did the voiceover for the instructional video for that game.
And,
Secret Spider.
Yeah, and he there's a link to his page in the description of this video as well, if you can't remember that spelling, so nice and simple. And
there you go. Thanks for everybody who joined us. Really appreciate all the hype building and participation. This has been fun. I think we're pushing the boundaries of live streaming here.
That's right. This was fun. It's a very different kind of episode, but it went great. So that encourages us maybe to do something similar in the future, but maybe with less images because of how much work that is for Shea.
Shea is in the background, like shaking her head.
Like, no, not like this, not like this. It's maybe similar, but with less images. Okay, so thanks again, everybody. We will be saying signing off now on behalf of Shea, on behalf of I can't say anything. On behalf of LML, enjoy episode 5 tonight if you're watching this live or catching it right before the show, and check out LML moving over to Tony Teflon's channel as well if you want to keep the hype going while we get ready for Eastwatch is the name of the episode. And if you're catching this later, well, enjoy it, and I hope you enjoyed Eastwatch after the fact. Obviously, I don't know how good it's going to be until we see it. So Valar re-watch us, Valar re-read us, Valar re-symbol us, Valar re-Lucifer means light bringer us.
Valar God's Eyes.
Valar God's Eyes. Valar Otherus. Valar Children of the Forestus. And all that. Goodbye,
Peace.
everyone.